Across the globe, there are places where people vanish, leaving behind no trace of their passage, as if the earth itself has quietly claimed them. In the dense, shadowed forests of Japan, under the jagged ridges of Siberia, and along deserts where the sun scorches and the wind scours every path, the missing linger only in whispered reports and official records. In some regions, abandoned settlements, hidden caves and glacial slopes hint at the journeys that ended abruptly and mysteriously, while rivers, marshes and mountain passes seem to erase all evidence of their travellers. Tracing the paths of explorers, hikers and ordinary wanderers, you will encounter the same routes that led them into silence. As each chapter unfolds, you confront landscapes that hold secrets, stories of unexplained disappearances, and the chilling reality of places where the missing are never found. The Bennington Triangle, Vermont. The forests and mountains of southwestern Vermont do not appear hostile at first glance. Yet, within a loosely defined area near Glastonbury Mountain, people have vanished in ways that resist explanation and resolution. This region, later labelled the Bennington Triangle, sits within the Green Mountain National Forest, an expanse of ridgelines, valleys and old logging roads where visibility shifts quickly and distances distort under dense canopy. Despite being neither remote wilderness nor unexplored terrain, it has repeatedly absorbed individuals who entered it under ordinary circumstances and were never recovered. The pattern is not rooted in a single tragedy, but in a sequence of disappearances that unfolded across decades, each one documented, investigated, and left unresolved. Long before the disappearances drew modern attention, Glastonbury itself had already acquired a reputation for abandonment. Once a small logging settlement in the 19th century, the town was eventually deserted as industry collapsed and access proved too difficult to maintain. By the early 20th century, only cellar holes, foundations, and scattered artifacts remained, slowly reclaimed by forest growth. Hikers travelling through the area encountered sudden silence, heavy tree cover, and terrain that rose sharply without warning. These physical conditions were documented in forestry reports and trail descriptions, emphasising how quickly weather, visibility, and orientation could change, even for experienced outdoorsmen. Yet none of these factors alone explain how people could vanish completely, leaving behind no remains despite repeated search efforts. One of the earliest and most cited disappearances occurred in November 1945, when Midi Rivers, an experienced hunting guide familiar with the terrain, failed to return from a trip near Hell Hollow. Rivers had guided parties through these woods many times, and was known to move confidently through difficult terrain. During the hunt, he walked slightly ahead of his companions, and was last seen crossing a stream. When he did not reappear, an extensive search was launched involving local volunteers, state authorities, and even military personnel. Bloodhounds tracked his scent briefly before losing it entirely, and despite weeks of searching, no body, equipment, or trace of Rivers was ever found. The following year, the disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon expanded the mystery beyond experienced outdoorsmen. Weldon was an 18-year-old college student who set out alone in December 1946 to hike the Long Trail near Glastonbury Mountain. Several witnesses reported seeing her along the trail that afternoon, wearing a red parka and walking confidently despite the cold. She never returned to her dormitory, and by nightfall, concern turned into a large-scale search. Vermont State Police, residents and military aircraft combed the area, yet no physical evidence of her fate emerged. Her clothing, body and personal belongings were never recovered, even though weather conditions would have preserved remains. Public attention intensified as the searches failed to produce answers, and the terrain itself began to draw scrutiny. Investigators noted that the Long Trail in that area passed through sections of steep ravines, dense spruce forest, and poorly marked junctions, yet none of these features adequately explained the absence of evidence. Weldon was reportedly an athletic and capable hiker, and no signs suggested she'd wandered far off the trail. Her disappearance prompted changes in Vermont's missing persons procedures, including the creation of a statewide police force, underscoring how deeply the case unsettled local authorities who could not account for her vanishing. In December 1949, the pattern continued with the disappearance of James Tedford, a 74-year-old veteran travelling by bus from St Albans to Bennington. Tedford was last seen asleep in his seat as the bus passed through the region near Glastonbury. When the bus arrived in Bennington, he was gone. His ticket and belongings remained in place, and fellow passengers reported nothing unusual during the journey. Authorities examined the route and found no indication that he could have exited unnoticed or suffered an accident along the way. No trace of Tedford was ever discovered, and his disappearance added a new dimension by occurring in transit rather than deep wilderness. Less than a year later, in October 1950, 8-year-old Paul Jepson vanished from a farm near the edge of the triangle. His mother had left him playing briefly while tending to animals nearby, and when she returned he was gone. Searchers found a single clue, a discarded jacket belonging to the child, but no footprints or clear direction of travel. Hundreds of volunteers searched fields, forests and nearby streams, yet nothing more was recovered. The absence of physical evidence in such a contained area raised troubling questions about how quickly and completely someone could disappear in this landscape. The cluster of cases, concentrated within a few years in a limited geographic area, led researchers to examine environmental explanations more closely. Geological surveys of the region describe unusual topography shaped by glacial activity, with sink-like depressions, uneven magnetic readings, and dense undergrowth that complicates ground searches. While these factors are verifiable, they do not account for the failure of repeated searches involving trained professionals, dogs and aircraft. In several cases, weather conditions were stable, visibility was reasonable, and search operations began quickly, reducing the likelihood that evidence would simply vanish without a trace. Over time, the Bennington Triangle became a focal point for discussion, not because of folklore, but because of the consistency with which investigations reached dead ends. Records show that authorities pursued conventional explanations, including accidents, voluntary disappearance, and criminal involvement. Yet none produced substantiated conclusions. No remains surfaced years later. No personal items emerged during logging or trail maintenance, and no confessions or sightings resolved the cases. The land absorbed the missing without yielding answers, creating a persistent absence that official explanations could not close. What makes the Bennington Triangle especially unsettling is not the number of disappearances alone, but their circumstances. People vanished while accompanied, while visible to others, or while following established routes. Searches were conducted promptly and thoroughly, yet failed repeatedly. Unlike other wilderness cases where remains are eventually discovered, these individuals seem to have been erased from the physical record of the place. The forest continues to be used by hikers and hunters today, its trails mapped and maintained, while the disappearances remain suspended in documentation without resolution. Decades later, Glastonbury Mountain and its surrounding forests retain an uneasy reputation, grounded in these unresolved cases rather than in legend. Official records still list several individuals as missing, their fates unknown despite exhaustive efforts to locate them. The landscape has changed little, and the conditions that once confounded searchers still exist, quietly unchanged beneath the trees. The Bennington Triangle does not offer clear warnings or visible danger, only the persistent fact that people entered its boundaries and were never found again. Somewhere within those forests, the ground holds answers it has never released, and each passing year only deepens the silence surrounding what truly happened there. Lake Baikal, Siberia. From space, Lake Baikal appears less like a lake than a rupture in the Earth's surface, a long dark line cutting through southern Siberia that hints at scale rather than scenery. It holds more fresh water than any other lake on the planet and reaches depths so extreme that sunlight vanishes far above its floor. Somewhere within this immense body of water, people have disappeared and have never recovered, leaving behind only partial records and unanswered questions. Unlike remote forests or mountain passes, Baikal does not hide behind isolation. It dominates the region, visible, studied and traversed, yet capable of erasing human presence with little trace. The mystery here is not confined to a single incident, but embedded like the lake itself. Long before disappearances drew attention, scientists were already struggling to define Lake Baikal in ordinary terms. Formed more than 20 million years ago, it is the world's oldest freshwater lake, sitting within an active rift zone where the Earth's crust continues to pull apart. Its depth exceeds 1,600 meters, and its volume accounts for roughly 1/5 of the planet's unfrozen freshwater supply. Internal currents move unpredictably, driven by temperature layers rather than surface winds. These measurable documented characteristics make Baikal behave less like a lake and more like an inland sea, a fact that complicates every attempt to understand what happens once something sinks beneath its surface. When people disappear in Lake Baikal, the water rarely returns what it takes. Cold water immersion behaves differently here than in most inland lakes, and recovery expectations often fail. The lake's temperatures remain near freezing at depth year-round, slowing decomposition and preventing the buildup of gases that would normally cause bodies to resurface. Strong subsurface currents can move objects laterally for great distances, while visibility drops to near zero beyond shallow depths. Search teams repeatedly document how divers lose reference points within minutes, and sonar readings struggle to distinguish human remains from rock formations scattered across the lake bed. Fishermen have long been among those most affected by Baikal's unpredictability, despite their familiarity with its rhythms. The lake supports a large fishing community, and its seasonal cycles are closely observed and recorded, yet incidents persist in which boats are later found drifting without occupants or never located at all. In some cases, equipment is recovered while the fishermen themselves are not, suggesting sudden events rather than gradual accidents. Official records confirm that extensive searches often yield no remains, even when the last known location is clearly established and weather conditions were stable. During winter, the lake presents a different kind of risk that has also led to permanent disappearances. Thick ice roads form across Baikal's surface, allowing vehicles to travel between settlements and across wide expanses of frozen water. These routes are monitored, mapped, and widely used, yet the ice is never uniform. Cracks can open rapidly, and sections that appear solid may conceal thin layers beneath snow cover. Vehicles have fallen through the ice and later been located submerged, while their occupants were never recovered, leaving only mechanical evidence behind and no confirmation of what happened in the moments after the ice gave way. Divers and researchers have also vanished in Baikal's depths, despite advanced training and preparation. The lake attracts scientific expeditions due to its unique ecosystem and geological significance, and numerous dives have been conducted using both recreational and professional equipment. Yet the extreme depth gradient means that conditions change abruptly, with pressure increasing faster than in most freshwater environments. Documented incidents describe divers failing to return to the surface, followed by recovery attempts that end once safe operating limits are reached. In several cases, no bodies or equipment were ever located, even after repeated searches. Search operations on Lake Baikal often conclude not because effort is exhausted, but because physical limitations make further attempts impossible. The lake's depth exceeds the reach of most standard recovery methods, and cold temperatures restrict dive duration and frequency. Visibility is frequently reduced by sediment clouds stirred by currents, while uneven terrain creates countless crevices and drop-offs where objects can vanish from detection. Authorities document these constraints openly, noting that certain areas of the lake are effectively inaccessible, even with coordinated search teams and modern equipment. Technological advances have not eliminated the problem. Sonar mapping and submersible missions have charted sections of the lake bed, revealing steep underwater cliffs, hydrothermal activity, and vast sediment fields. Yet only a fraction of Baikal's floor has been thoroughly examined, and mapping efforts often prioritize scientific study rather than recovery. Objects detected at extreme depths are difficult to identify conclusively, and retrieving them can be impossible. The gap between what technology can observe and what it can recover remains wide, leaving many disappearances unresolved. Those who work regularly on Lake Baikal describe a psychological effect that accompanies its physical dangers. The sheer scale of the lake distorts perception, making distances appear shorter and conditions more manageable than they truly are. Weather can shift rapidly, with fog and wind erasing visual landmarks across the water. In winter, the flat white surface offers little sense of movement or direction. These factors are well documented in regional reports and first-hand accounts, and they contribute to situations where misjudgment occurs without immediate warning or visible threat. What distinguishes Lake Baikal from many other hazardous environments is the consistency with which investigations end in the absence of. Official records show patterns where individuals enter the lake under ordinary circumstances, distress is reported, and searches are initiated promptly. Yet the outcome remains the same: no remains, no definitive cause, and no resolution. Unlike environments where erosion or scavenging explains the loss of evidence, Baikal preserves much of what it takes, but not in ways accessible to those searching for answers. Today, Lake Baikal continues to function as both a vital resource and a subject of scientific fascination. Ships cross its surface, ice roads reopen each winter, and research teams return season after season to study its unique properties. At the same time, unresolved disappearances remain part of its documented history, quietly acknowledged but rarely explained. The lake does not change its behaviour in response to attention or technology, and it offers no indication of where its missing are held or if they will ever be found. Beneath its calm surface and measured statistics, Lake Baikal keeps its answers at depths that remain beyond reach, waiting in silence where searching can no longer follow. The Alaska Triangle. In Alaska, distance is not measured only in miles, but in hours of isolation between one point of human contact and the next. Roads thin out, settlements scatter, and large regions exist where a person can travel for days without crossing another human presence. Within this vastness lies what is commonly referred to as the Alaska Triangle, an area associated with repeated disappearances in which people leave one location and are never found at another. The mystery does not centre on a single forest, mountain, or body of water, but on the space between places where movement itself becomes fragile. Alaska's scale turns ordinary travel into an exercise in endurance, timing, and trust that nothing along the way will fail. The Alaska Triangle spans much of the state's interior, covering remote wilderness, mountain ranges, and sparsely connected routes between towns. It is not marked by borders or signs, and its limits shift depending on which disappearances are examined. What links the cases is not geography alone, but circumstance. Many vanish while travelling for work, supplies, or routine transport rather than exploration. The distances involved mean that a missed arrival may not be noticed immediately, allowing critical hours or days to pass before concern turns into action. In Alaska, delay is often the difference between recovery and permanent absence. Aircraft play a central role in many of these unresolved cases, reflecting Alaska's reliance on aviation for everyday transportation. Bush planes and small aircraft connect communities unreachable by road, flying routes that cross mountains, tundra, and forest. Documented incidents show planes disappearing mid-flight, sometimes without distress calls, sometimes after routine check-ins. Even when the last known coordinates are recorded, searchers often fail to locate wreckage or remains. The terrain below can absorb debris quickly, with snow, water, and vegetation concealing evidence before recovery teams arrive. Weather in Alaska compounds this problem by altering conditions faster than response systems can adapt. Clear skies can give way to fog, wind, or snow within minutes, erasing visual references and grounding search aircraft. Mountain waves, icing, and sudden pressure changes are known hazards, yet even when these factors are acknowledged, they rarely lead to definitive conclusions. Weather records may explain why a flight encountered trouble, but they do not explain why no trace was ever found afterward. In many cases, the environment resets itself long before investigators can reconstruct events. Disappearance in the Alaska Triangle is not limited to the air. Long highways, ice roads, and seasonal routes cut through terrain where mechanical failure or navigation errors can isolate travellers almost instantly. Vehicles have been reported missing along established roads, with no confirmed sightings beyond a certain point. When searches follow, the sheer size of the area makes complete coverage impossible. Rivers, ravines, and dense vegetation complicate ground searches, while winter conditions can bury tracks within hours. Once evidence is lost, it rarely reappears. Communication gaps play a quiet but critical role in these disappearances. Large portions of Alaska lack reliable radio or cellular coverage, and satellite communication is not universal. Travellers may go hours or days without making contact, meaning a problem can escalate unnoticed. Flight plans and travel schedules provide rough timelines, but they cannot account for unplanned delays or route changes. By the time an absence is recognised, the search window may already be narrowing and the available information may be outdated or incomplete. Search and rescue operations in Alaska are among the most challenging in the world, not because of a lack of expertise, but because of scale. Teams must contend with enormous search areas, limited daylight during parts of the year, and weather that can halt operations entirely. Aircraft searches are constrained by fuel range and visibility, while ground teams face physical exhaustion and environmental risk. Official reports often note that searches are suspended not due to lack of effort, but because continuing would place rescuers in danger without increasing the likelihood of recovery. Maps, while essential, offer only a partial guide to Alaska's reality. Topographical charts can simplify terrain that is far more complex on the ground, flattening elevation changes and minimizing obstacles. Rivers shift course, snow alters landmarks, and seasonal changes transform familiar routes into unrecognizable landscapes. A location that appears accessible on a map may be unreachable in practice, and a straight line between 2 points can conceal dozens of hazards. This mismatch between representation and reality contributes to situations where search areas expand faster than resources can follow. The result is a growing record of cases that never resolve. Official files remain open for years, sometimes decades, with no remains, wreckage, or definitive explanations added over time. Families are left with timelines that end abruptly and investigations that stop without answers. Unlike disappearances in smaller regions, Alaska's cases do not accumulate in one place where patterns can be easily traced. Instead, they scatter across the state, connected only by the absence they leave behind. Despite this history, movement across Alaska continues without pause. Flights depart daily, highways remain active, and remote communities rely on the same routes where others have vanished. Life proceeds because it must, even as unanswered cases linger in the background. The systems that enable travel also accept its risks, acknowledging that some losses may never be explained or recovered. Alaska does not close itself off in response to disappearance, it continues to function indifferent to the gaps left behind. The Alaska Triangle endures not as a fixed location on a map, but as a condition created by distance, movement, and the limits of human reach. It exists wherever travel pushes beyond immediate observation and recovery becomes uncertain. The mystery is not why Alaska is dangerous, but why so many journeys end without a trace at all. Each disappearance adds to a pattern that resists simplification, suggesting that the land does not merely challenge those who cross it, but quietly absorbs the evidence that they ever did. Between checkpoints and horizons, Alaska still holds the unanswered moments where people vanished, while the rest of the journey simply continued without them. The Panama Jungle Gap, Darien Gap. Thick, interwoven vines and towering ceiba trees create a canopy so dense over the Darien Gap that daylight barely reaches the forest floor, and travellers can vanish within moments. This region, straddling the border between Panama and Colombia, is a place where people have entered and never returned, leaving only whispers, partial records, or empty paths in their wake. Unlike structured wilderness, the gap is a living, shifting labyrinth. Rivers alter course, vegetation grows unpredictably, and terrain rises and falls with no warning. It is not simply remote, it is nearly impenetrable, and the disappearances here are shaped by an environment that both conceals and overwhelms human presence. Rivers and swamps crisscross the terrain, carving channels that deepen and broaden with each rainy season, making navigation almost impossible for those unfamiliar with the landscape. Documented accounts from local guides and researchers note that crossing even a few miles can take hours or days under ordinary conditions. Paths that appear on outdated maps often vanish beneath vegetation, while temporary waterways can carry travellers away or separate them from companions. These hydrological complexities create natural traps, slowing movement and scattering evidence in ways that frustrate search efforts and erase the traces of anyone who passes through. Historical expeditions in the early 20th century highlight the jungle's capacity to absorb those who enter it. Survey teams and explorers, often small in number and equipped only with basic supplies, sometimes failed to emerge despite careful planning and knowledge of river patterns. Official records and contemporary reports document instances in which groups went missing entirely, leaving behind only camp remnants or abandoned equipment. These early cases established a persistent pattern. People disappear quickly, and the gap itself provides no reliable mechanism for discovery or recovery. Migrants in recent decades face similar dangers as they attempt to cross the Darien Gap on foot. Reports from humanitarian organizations indicate that individuals often travel alone or in small groups, navigating through swamps, dense undergrowth, and fast-moving streams. Documented disappearances in this context reveal a grim reality. Even with modern awareness of the risks, the jungle continues to claim lives and leave no trace. Unlike urban or structured environments, where missing persons are quickly noticed, the gap allows entire journeys to vanish unnoticed, with no signalling or tracking. Sudden storms transform the landscape within minutes, turning seemingly passable terrain into a torrent of mud, debris, and flooded waterways. Official reports note that rainfall can erase footprints, wash away campsites, and redirect rivers, leaving search teams uncertain of where a traveller might have gone. The combination of rapid environmental change and dense vegetation means that even experienced searchers struggle to locate individuals before the jungle conceals them entirely. Evidence that might survive in drier or more open terrain simply does not endure here. Crocodiles, snakes, and other wildlife contribute to the hazards, though not in ways that explain every disappearance. The Gap's documented fauna includes numerous predators and venomous species that can remove or obscure traces of human presence. While such wildlife rarely appears in isolation from other risks, it magnifies the jungle's natural capacity to obscure movement and evidence. Travellers unfamiliar with these dangers may underestimate the environment's ability to remove signs of entry or passage. Search parties entering the Gap confront impenetrable growth, labyrinthine waterways, and terrain that defies measurement or prediction. Accounts from rescue teams describe conditions where visibility rarely exceeds a few meters, and every step carries the possibility of disorientation or injury. The density of the jungle prevents full coverage, meaning that even organised searches with multiple teams can miss entire sections where someone may have passed. Reports consistently document the futility of attempting recovery once a traveller is separated from known trails or landmarks. Tropical heat and humidity accelerate the breakdown of organic material, turning clothing, supplies, and human remains into unrecognisable detritus within days. Rainfall washes away tracks and disrupts campsites, while insects and scavengers further obscure evidence. These processes are well studied and have been cited in official observations of missing person investigations, yet they do not fully explain the psychological weight of disappearances. Entire journeys can vanish almost as if the travellers were never present at all. Travellers themselves report a disorienting sameness throughout the jungle. Every tree trunk, moss-covered root, and muddy stream can appear identical to the next, erasing memory and confusing orientation. First-hand accounts from both researchers and migrants emphasize how quickly a person can become lost, even when following a known route. In such conditions, a single misstep or wrong turn can separate an individual permanently from those who might notice their absence. Across decades, a clear pattern emerges. People enter the Darien Gap under ordinary circumstances and leave nothing behind. Historical expeditions, modern migrants, and researchers alike have fallen into the same fate, leaving the forest to reclaim every trace. Unlike other wildernesses where remains or artifacts eventually resurface, the Gap's combination of water, dense vegetation, predators, and climate accelerates disappearance to the point where physical evidence becomes virtually non-existent. Today, the Darien Gap remains largely untouched, its dense growth reclaiming any trails, campsites, or remnants of those who entered. Aid organisations, researchers, and travellers continue to study and cross parts of the jungle, fully aware of the risks yet compelled by necessity, curiosity, or survival. Each passage through the forest carries the same potential for erasure that has persisted for decades, linking modern journeys to those that disappeared long ago. The Gap endures as both a corridor and a vault, holding the secrets of all who vanished within it. The Darien Gap swallows those who enter with a quiet inevitability, keeping its missing where the forest refuses to yield their stories. Mount Ararat's upper slopes, Turkey. Snowfields stretch across Mount Ararat's upper slopes like a frozen ocean, hiding crevasses that swallow travellers without a trace. This towering peak in eastern Turkey, rising to 5,137 metres, has long been a place where explorers, climbers, and local guides have entered and never returned. Unlike forests or glaciers in other regions, Ararat's danger is vertical, shaped by ice, rock, and altitude, creating conditions that can erase human presence almost instantly. Documented accounts show a recurring pattern. Climbers ascend under ordinary circumstances and sometimes vanish, leaving little or no evidence behind, their journeys absorbed into the mountain itself. The volcanic formation of Ararat produces glaciers, ridges and steep slopes that shift gradually yet constantly over decades. Snowfields conceal gaps and fissures that are impossible to detect until it is too late. Even well-travelled routes marked by early expeditions can be altered by seasonal melt or ice movement, leaving climbers disoriented. Researchers have noted that the landscape's verticality multiplies the risk of injury or disappearance, as a misstep or sudden slide can carry a person hundreds of meters down icy slopes. The mountain itself acts as both obstacle and eraser, preserving no clear record of human presence. Historical expeditions highlight the mountain's capacity to claim travellers. Survey teams and mountaineering parties in the early 20th century frequently ventured onto the upper slopes and glaciers, documenting their intentions and progress, yet some failed to return. Reports from that era describe climbers disappearing while ascending seemingly manageable routes or near campsites, leaving only partial equipment or abandoned tents behind. Multiple accounts, corroborated by local and international sources, indicate that the upper slopes have long concealed humans from sight. These early incidents established a pattern that has persisted into the present, framing Ararat as a place where vanishing is always possible. Modern climbers continue to face similar risks, despite improved equipment and technology. GPS devices, crampons and satellite communications do not guarantee safety on glaciers or steep ridges. There are documented instances of climbers last seen near established camps who never returned, with search teams combing the slopes without success. Even experienced mountaineers report that crevasses and unstable snow can isolate individuals from companions within minutes. The mountain's scale, altitude and ice conditions make it unforgiving, and disappearance can occur despite careful planning, leaving investigators and searchers with nothing but conjecture. Crevasses are among the most insidious dangers on Ararat. Hidden beneath thin layers of snow, they can extend unpredictably and vary in depth from a few meters to over 50. Climbers often mistake a solid snow cover for stable footing, only to fall into fissures with sheer walls, making self-rescue nearly impossible. Over decades, these formations have absorbed travellers, with only rare fragments of clothing, ropes or equipment emerging years later. Even in well-documented cases, the ice has concealed victims completely, preventing recovery and leaving no evidence to explain what occurred. The mountain's weather compounds these hazards. Blizzards and sudden storms can descend without warning, reducing visibility to near zero and transforming familiar terrain into a uniform expanse of white. Footprints vanish within minutes, and campsites may be buried under meters of snow or ice. Climbers caught in these conditions frequently lose orientation and may inadvertently descend into dangerous slopes or crevassed areas. Reports from mountaineers describe entire days spent navigating through featureless whiteout, emphasizing how quickly the mountain can claim travelers while leaving no trace of their passage. Altitude sickness and fatigue intensify the mountain's natural risks. Above 4,500 meters, oxygen levels are low enough to impair judgment, coordination, and reaction time. Even physically fit climbers may succumb to dizziness, nausea, or disorientation, increasing the likelihood of slips, missteps, or exposure. Exhaustion can slow movement, making it difficult to navigate safely across ridges and glaciers. Cases of disappearance often involve these physiological factors in combination with terrain hazards, highlighting the lethal interplay of human vulnerability and extreme environment on the upper slopes. Search and rescue efforts are often limited by terrain and conditions. Helicopters cannot always hover over steep ridges or rapidly shifting glaciers, while ground teams must contend with unstable snow, hidden crevasses, and avalanche risk. Even well-equipped, experienced teams frequently fail to locate missing climbers, leaving incidents unresolved. Multiple documented missions have ended without any trace, demonstrating how Mount Ararat can erase human presence almost entirely. The mountain's unforgiving slopes create an environment in which disappearance is not only possible but repeatedly demonstrated across decades of exploration. Occasionally, fragments of equipment or clothing emerge years later from retreating glaciers, offering rare hints about lost journeys. Such findings are exceptions, providing only partial insight into what occurred or where the climber went. Most disappearances leave nothing at all, and the mountain slowly reclaims any trace, reshaping the terrain through seasonal snowmelt, ice movement, and rockfall. This combination of concealment, verticality, and environmental change allows the mountain to absorb human presence completely, leaving behind only questions and speculation for those left observing from below. Mount Ararat continues to tower over eastern Turkey, its glaciers advancing and retreating, reshaping ridges, slopes, and icefalls with silent inevitability. Travellers still attempt its upper reaches, drawn by challenge, history, and legend, yet the mountain remains indifferent to human effort or curiosity. Ice, rock, and altitude combine to conceal every misstep or fall, rendering the mountain's upper slopes a place where disappearance is always a possibility. Across decades, stories of those who vanished persist, tied to the mountain's permanent and unforgiving presence. On Mount Ararat's upper slopes, the ice conceals what it claims, leaving climbers vanished and stories suspended where the mountain itself holds the truth. The Great Basin Desert, Nevada. Beneath a sky so vast it swallows all perception of distance, the Great Basin Desert spreads across arid valleys and salt flats where travellers have vanished without a trace. The region covers much of central and northern Nevada, a mix of rugged mountains, shallow basins, and salt-crusted flats that create an environment both deceptively open and subtly treacherous. Sparse vegetation and long stretches of seemingly empty terrain give the illusion of safety, yet beneath the surface lie hidden washes, soft sand, and dry stream beds that can conceal movement and erase any sign of passage, making disappearances not only possible but disturbingly common. Mountain ranges rise like silent sentinels from the basin floor, their shadowed gullies and hidden washes concealing both the land's features and the evidence of those who wander into them. Ranges such as the Snake, Ruby, and Twayabe Mountains carve dramatic relief across the desert, creating narrow valleys where sudden drops, jagged rocks, and hidden ravines challenge navigation. For travellers on foot or by vehicle, the shifting angles of sunlight and the absence of distinct landmarks can obscure distances and orientation. Even experienced locals note that visibility can be misleading, and what appears to be a short traverse may conceal dangerous terrain capable of swallowing a person without leaving a clue. Temperatures swing from blistering heat during daylight to bitter cold at night, producing conditions that can exhaust, disorient, and overwhelm even the most prepared explorers. Summer days often exceed 40 degrees Celsius in exposed valleys, while nighttime temperatures can plummet below freezing at higher elevations. Dehydration, heat stroke, or hypothermia are constant risks, especially for those attempting long treks across remote stretches. Sudden storms, dust devils, and microbursts further complicate travel, creating hazardous conditions within minutes. Many disappearances coincide with these environmental extremes, showing how the desert itself can incapacitate humans without leaving evidence of the precise moment or cause. Early records recount prospectors, ranchers, and wanderers entering remote parts of the desert, disappearing with no explanation, leaving only incomplete reports and unanswered questions. Mining camps, transient settlements, and isolated homesteads in the 19th and early 20th centuries were linked to several unexplained vanishings. Individuals sometimes left behind supplies, wagons, or personal effects, yet never returned to claim them. Local newspapers and government records chronicle these cases, often describing searches that yielded no bodies, footprints, or tracks. These early disappearances established a legacy of mystery, showing that even in the open expanse of the Great Basin, human presence can vanish entirely. In recent decades, hikers, off-road travellers, and campers have gone missing, with search parties finding nothing but disturbed sand, shifted debris, or vague signs erased by wind. Modern cases, documented by local law enforcement and federal agencies, reflect the same pattern as historical vanishings. People enter the desert with preparation and intent, yet never re-emerge. Vehicles are sometimes found abandoned, campsites cleared of personal items, and trails erased by weather. In other instances, technological aids such as GPS or cell phones fail to prevent disorientation. Even satellite searches and aerial surveys rarely yield clues, underscoring how the desert can absorb travellers entirely. The desert confounds perception with repetitive plains and distant peaks, while mirages and heat haze mislead navigators and erode their sense of location. Vast basins lined with indistinct foothills create optical illusions that make distances deceptive, and shimmering salt flats reflect sunlight to produce mirage effects that suggest water, paths, or landmarks where none exist. Travellers can find themselves circling the same area for hours, unknowingly retracing steps or moving further from intended destinations. These illusions, combined with the subtle and shifting topography, make it easy for even experienced explorers to lose orientation, sometimes fatally. Hidden washes, ephemeral streams, and shifting dunes can erase footprints or discarded gear within hours, leaving no trace that someone was ever there. After a dust storm, sand drifts can completely bury tracks, while flash floods or sudden wind gusts can wash away subtle signs of movement. Dry riverbeds, often hidden in valleys or behind ridges, are especially dangerous, as someone falling or wandering into one may leave no evidence. Even search dogs struggle in these conditions, as scents are quickly dispersed or buried. The desert's own natural processes act as an eraser, masking human presence and deepening the mystery of disappearance. Search efforts are frustrated by the terrain's vastness, subtle concealments, and sudden dust storms, often forcing authorities to abandon hope of recovery. Volunteer groups, state patrols, and federal agencies frequently organise searches that last days or weeks, but the sheer scale of the basin and the rapid erasure of evidence often prevent results. A single basin can encompass hundreds of square kilometres, with hidden gullies and washes that cannot be safely accessed in time. Even with aerial surveillance or modern mapping, the desert's characteristics make it nearly impossible to locate someone who has vanished into its expanse. Isolation and sensory monotony wear down the mind, causing fatigue, errors in judgment, and decisions that may lead individuals into danger with irreversible consequences. Hours of uniform terrain, repetitive horizon lines, and the absence of auditory cues challenge cognition and perception. Travellers may overestimate distances, underestimate risks, or fail to recognise subtle landmarks. Mental fatigue, combined with dehydration or temperature stress, can produce disorientation so severe that a person may wander into a wash or become trapped in shifting sand, leaving no record of where or how they disappeared. Patterns emerge in the documented disappearances. Extreme weather, deceptive terrain, and human vulnerability combine repeatedly to produce unresolved cases across the basin. While no single factor explains every incident, investigators note recurring elements, sudden environmental change, deceptive perception of distance, and isolation that compounds minor errors. Whether the missing were miners, hikers, or off-road travellers, the desert consistently absorbs individuals who enter under ordinary circumstances. Decades of reporting, search operations, and studies highlight that the land itself, rather than human error alone, is often the critical agent in these disappearances. Decades of exploration have altered little. The Great Basin Desert endures, its valleys, salt flats, and hidden washes holding secrets in plain sight while leaving human traces to vanish. Roadways, trails, and seasonal paths remain largely unchanged, but the subtle hazards of sand, wash, and wind persist. Travellers continue to enter the basin, aware of the risks yet drawn by remoteness or challenge, and the desert continues to enforce its own rules. While some emerge unscathed, others disappear entirely, swallowed by an environment that leaves nothing behind, maintaining the desert's quiet, enduring mystery. Across the hidden valleys and windswept flats of the Great Basin, those who disappear leave nothing behind, swallowed silently by a desert that neither sees nor remembers. Aokigahara Forest, Japan. At the base of Mount Fuji, Aokigahara Forest unfolds in dense, twisted groves, a silent labyrinth where travellers have disappeared without a trace. Stretching across more than 35 square kilometres, the forest is built upon hardened lava from centuries of volcanic activity, giving it a jagged and uneven terrain that challenges orientation. Its twisted trees, thick undergrowth, and rocky fissures create a natural maze in which distance and direction are distorted. For those unfamiliar with its labyrinthine paths, the forest absorbs footsteps and erases the evidence of presence, leaving only questions behind when someone vanishes. Layers of volcanic rock and uneven terrain form hidden depressions and lava caves that can swallow footprints, gear, and any sign of human passage. These natural formations are irregular and often hidden beneath moss or undergrowth, so that even experienced hikers can unknowingly wander into areas from which they cannot be easily retrieved. Lava tubes run beneath the surface, forming tunnels and hollows that appear shallow but can descend unpredictably. The forest's volcanic foundation, while scientifically well understood, contributes to the impossibility of recovering missing persons in many documented cases, where no trace remains despite extensive searches. A thick carpet of moss covers the forest floor, absorbing sound so completely that even nearby movement can vanish into near total silence. This muffling effect renders normal auditory cues unreliable. Wind, footsteps, or the cries of wildlife are dampened, leaving travellers isolated in an uncanny quiet. Investigators have noted that the lack of echo and sound perception can disorient even those accustomed to dense forest navigation, compounding the natural hazards of uneven ground and sudden drops. The combination of silence and visual monotony adds an invisible layer of danger, as people can become unaware of how far they have strayed from their entry point. Local legends and centuries of folklore have imbued the forest with a reputation as a place where those who enter may never return. References to Aokigahara as a site of spiritual significance, haunted by the restless dead or supernatural presence, appear in historical accounts and literary sources. These stories have influenced the perception of the forest for generations, creating an air of apprehension around its interior. While the majority of disappearances are documented with modern procedures, the cultural weight of the forest as a place of disappearance intensifies its mystique, adding psychological tension to anyone who ventures inside. In modern records, hikers, tourists and residents have vanished along well-marked paths, leaving authorities to search a maze of trees, roots and rocky outcrops. Cases have been recorded over decades, with some missing persons last seen entering popular access points, intending only short excursions. Search teams often comb areas for hours, yet the combination of dense undergrowth, lava formations and uneven terrain yields little to no evidence. Personal items are sometimes found far from the last confirmed location, but human remains or direct clues are extraordinarily rare, suggesting that the forest conceals those who enter more effectively than typical wilderness. The dense canopy allows only slivers of sunlight to reach the ground, distorting perception and making orientation almost impossible without careful navigation. Shadows shift constantly through the forest, and landmarks become confusing or misleading in areas of repeated undergrowth. Trees grow in tangled clusters, often forming narrow corridors or dead ends, while moss and lichen cover rocks and roots that could otherwise serve as reference points. Explorers frequently report a sense of dislocation, a perception that distances are shorter or longer than they truly are, which increases the likelihood of wandering off trail or entering concealed areas where retrieval becomes unlikely. Twisting lava tubes, narrow crevices and collapsed caverns hide gaps in the landscape, making many areas inaccessible and frustrating even experienced searchers. Some lava tubes extend hundreds of meters underground, partially collapsed or covered with debris, while others appear as small openings that expand into subterranean chambers. Rescue operations often cannot penetrate these formations without specialized equipment, leaving areas effectively off-limits. These features account for the continued mystery surrounding the forest, as countless individuals who vanish may simply have become trapped in places that are physically undetectable without extraordinary effort. Police and volunteers describe moving through the forest as if stepping through a silent living maze, where landmarks appear familiar yet impossible to relocate. Even with maps and trail markers, searchers can become disoriented as the terrain repeats itself visually, and paths once visible disappear under fallen branches, moss or rocks. Local authorities have implemented measures such as ropes and signposts, but these interventions often fail in areas of high complexity. The forest itself seems to resist mapping in a way that allows certainty, leaving those searching both for the missing and for their own bearings challenged by its natural design. Unpredictable hazards, from sudden drops to unstable rocks and pockets of damp, freezing air, compound the risk of anyone venturing off the few maintained trails. Weather can change suddenly, with fog or rain reducing visibility and making lava surfaces slippery. Natural features such as small cliffs, hidden depressions, or loose boulders present immediate threats to travelers who stray from established paths. Even with experience, individuals can fall or become trapped in situations where help cannot reach them in time. These hazards, combined with the forest's labyrinthine structure, amplify the mysterious disappearance of those who enter. The forest's quiet, heavy presence exerts a psychological weight, creating tension and disorientation that can deepen confusion and amplify the difficulty of finding one's way. People entering the forest may experience heightened anxiety, uncertainty, or hesitation, and the repetition of visual patterns adds to a sense of entrapment. Studies on spatial cognition in dense forests suggest that such environments can impair decision-making, leading individuals further into concealed areas. The combination of environmental and psychological factors ensures that the forest itself becomes an active agent in the continued mystery surrounding disappearances. Despite centuries of exploration and frequent human traffic, Aokigahara continues to conceal those who enter, maintaining a near impenetrable veil over the lives that vanish within. Trails, paths, and areas frequently visited by researchers or tourists still leave swathes of the forest untouched and inaccessible. The interplay of natural features, sensory deprivation, and psychological impact means that the forest preserves its secrets, swallowing those who enter with a consistency that has fascinated, alarmed, and puzzled investigators for generations. Its quiet persistence ensures that disappearances remain unsolved and the forest's reputation endures. Within Aokigahara's silent canopy and labyrinthine lava beds, those who vanish become part of the forest itself, leaving no sound, no trace, and no answer to what truly occurred. The Ural Mountains' northern passes, Russia. Travellers have simply vanished while following well-worn routes, leaving behind only abandoned supplies and questions that no search has answered. Over the decades, explorers, trappers, and hikers have disappeared without warning, often in broad daylight or under conditions that should have been safe. Even those familiar with the Northern Pass's challenges can be claimed by subtle hazards, hidden crevices, sudden shifts in weather, or treacherous ice. Records indicate that some were last seen conversing with companions, while others stepped briefly out of view, only to be erased from the known world entirely. These vanishings have drawn attention from historians, authorities, and local communities, all puzzled by the consistency with which people disappear. The biting cold seeps through layers of clothing faster than one can respond, slowing limbs and clouding judgment in ways that confound even experienced explorers. Hypothermia, frostbite, and exposure can take hold rapidly in the northern Urals, and a minor misstep can turn a routine hike into a desperate struggle for survival. Even simple routes across valleys and ridges demand constant attention, as snow and ice conceal unstable ground. In cases where missing travellers were later found or partially recovered, the effects of cold exposure suggest that the environment itself can incapacitate long before rescue becomes possible. Yet in many cases, nothing is ever found, leaving only the fact of absence. Small details, broken branch, a faint track, a snapped rope, become all but impossible to detect amid the subtle hazards that erase every trace of passage. Investigators have documented scenes where a personal item remains, lying in odd alignment or alone in the snow, yet no body or additional evidence follows. These clues hint at movement, struggle, or hesitation, but they stop abruptly, as if the individual stepped beyond the boundary of reality itself. Even trained trackers and search dogs fail to follow the faintest trail once it disappears into the forested slopes, emphasizing how quickly the mountains can reclaim what enters. Accounts from locals and historians describe parties that set out on routine expeditions yet never returned, their fates disappearing into rumour and the record alike. Diaries from trappers in the 19th century mention colleagues who vanished during hunting trips, leaving only scattered tools or sleds behind. Early mapping expeditions also report surveyors who failed to reappear, prompting extended searches through passes that remained largely untouched. In these narratives, disappearances were not isolated. They occurred in patterns across decades, yet no consistent explanation emerged. Signals sent by radio or satellite often fail inexplicably, leaving authorities uncertain whether someone has strayed or simply vanished from the known world. Modern communication systems struggle in deep valleys, snow-laden forests, and behind mountain ridges, creating blackouts that impede rapid response. In several cases, travellers reported full-functioning radios that ceased transmitting without warning, a silence that coincided with their disappearance. Search teams, despite advanced technology and aerial reconnaissance, sometimes find no sign of entry or passage, intensifying the sense that the northern passes operate according to rules unknown to human understanding. Panic, fatigue, and isolation amplify with every hour, turning careful navigation into instinctive wandering that can lead travellers far from safety. Studies of human behaviour in extreme wilderness conditions indicate that stress and disorientation accelerate mistakes and misjudgments. In the northern Urals, the visual monotony of snow, forest and rock can undermine memory of prior landmarks, leading individuals in circles or into hazardous depressions. Even those with extensive survival training can succumb to exhaustion and cold, vanishing as if absorbed into the mountains themselves. Dogs, trained for tracking, lose scent almost immediately, as if whatever drew the missing persons into the mountains also erased their presence. Search teams report that after initial detection, the trail frequently ends abruptly on ridges, frozen streams, or dense thickets, leaving no path to follow. Snowfall and wind can erase evidence within hours, but in some cases searches begin immediately, suggesting that disappearance occurs faster than nature can account for. The inability of trained animals to maintain a trail reinforces the notion that these vanishings are unlike ordinary wilderness accidents. Even when footprints or traces are discovered, they often end abruptly at ridges, frozen streams, or sudden drops, leaving no hint of what came next. Investigators sometimes find small personal items, a glove, a scarf, or a pack, positioned incongruously, yet no other evidence appears despite thorough searches. In several historical cases, items remained intact while their owners were never found, defying expectation and suggesting a disappearance without physical explanation. These patterns recur frequently enough to inspire both concern and speculation among researchers, though no definitive cause has ever been determined. Survivors recount the unnerving quiet, the way sound seems absorbed and distorted, making companions appear farther than they are and landmarks impossible to locate. The silence magnifies perception, disorients movement, and can induce a psychological sense of being lost even on familiar routes. Those who return describe an almost supernatural quality to the environment, where snow, rock, and forest conspire to distort distance and timing. Combined with physical fatigue and the element's relentless pressure, this sensory disorientation contributes to the difficulty of remaining safe, let alone explaining the disappearances that have accumulated in records. Searchers sometimes find equipment or clothing abandoned in odd configurations, suggesting the vanished may have struggled, paused, or been diverted without leaving a body. Sleds left behind, packs overturned, and footprints abruptly ending all point to incidents that are sudden, disorienting, or beyond ordinary human understanding. While the northern Urals have been thoroughly mapped and periodically patrolled, large areas remain inaccessible due to snow, rock, or remoteness, allowing the environment to hide evidence almost indefinitely. The recurrence of these patterns, combined with the terrain's difficulty, ensures that many disappearances remain unresolved and mysterious. Though guided by maps, GPS, and historical records, patterns remain inconsistent, and the mystery of the northern passes persists across decades, frustrating experts and laypeople alike. Some travellers are reported missing in mild weather, others during violent storms, some vanish near shelters, others on routine crossings. No single explanation, accident, wildlife, or human error can account for all cases. Instead, the northern Urals maintain an enduring ambiguity, where natural and psychological hazards, extreme weather, and rugged terrain converge to swallow those who venture into these passes. Over the snowbound ridges and shadowed valleys of the northern Urals, those who vanish are absorbed by the mountains themselves, leaving behind nothing but silence and the cold trace of absence. The Strait of Messina, Italy. A sudden hush falls over the water, and even seasoned sailors instinctively sense that something in the currents is unpredictable. The Strait of Messina, the narrow passage separating Sicily from the Italian mainland, has long claimed travellers and vessels without explanation. While it is a vital route for commerce and transportation, its waters conceal hidden dangers that can emerge without warning. Mariners describe moments when the surface appears calm, only for the currents beneath to shift violently, carrying boats off course or submerging them entirely. Records from local ports and maritime authorities show a pattern of disappearances spanning centuries, each case leaving more questions than answers. Historical logs record ships whose crews disappeared mid-journey, leaving only scattered sails or overturned oars as clues. From medieval chroniclers to modern registries, accounts document instances of entire crews vanishing from sight, sometimes just hours after leaving port. In some cases, vessels were discovered adrift, empty of life, with no evidence of storm or collision. Authorities at the time could only speculate on causes, and even with modern technology, many disappearances remain unresolved. These chronicles emphasize the enduring nature of the Strait's dangers, which have consistently confounded navigators and investigators alike. Stories passed down through generations describe swirling eddies that twist and pull with a force no one can fully measure. Local fishermen speak of whirlpools appearing suddenly, capable of swallowing boats that venture too close, or redirecting even large ferries into unexpected currents. Oral histories describe how currents collide from multiple directions, creating turbulent pockets where even experienced swimmers and divers risk being dragged under. The combination of folklore and first-hand observation gives the Strait an almost mythic reputation, where truth and legend intertwine in ways that are difficult to separate. Waves can shift in moments, throwing compasses and instruments into confusion and forcing decisions that determine survival. Modern studies confirm that tidal patterns in the Strait are irregular, influenced by the complex interaction of the Tyrrhenian and Ionian seas. Mariners describe instruments malfunctioning or providing inconsistent readings as sudden eddies rotate beneath their vessels. Even well-prepared crews can find themselves disoriented within minutes, and miscalculations often result in dangerous proximity to rocky outcrops or submerged sandbars. These unpredictable conditions magnify the risk inherent in every crossing. Even in clear weather, travellers report subtle anomalies in the water, as if unseen forces are moving beneath the surface. Fishermen note areas where the sea seems to pulse or rise without wind or tide to account for it. Swimmers occasionally report a strange suction or sudden shift in depth, phenomena that seem to defy simple explanation. Scientific studies attribute some of these events to underwater currents and temperature gradients, but the concentration and timing of disappearances suggest that natural forces alone may not tell the full story. Rescue teams often find nothing but floating debris, with no indication of direction or final resting place for those lost. Coast Guard operations reveal that even rapid responses frequently yield little evidence, as currents disperse wreckage quickly across wide areas. Search operations sometimes recover personal belongings or fragments of vessels, yet no bodies follow. In documented cases spanning decades, the absence of recoverable remains has made it impossible to determine whether victims drowned, drifted out to sea, or met some other fate entirely. Panic spreads quickly when companions are separated by currents that rise and fall faster than anyone can react. Eyewitness accounts describe the sudden disorientation of travellers who moments before were in proximity only to find themselves isolated and struggling against forces far beyond human control. In the Strait, separation often occurs within seconds, and once an individual is caught in a strong eddy, even seasoned swimmers can vanish from view almost immediately. This rapid escalation underscores the Strait's capacity to erase presence with startling efficiency. Storm clouds sometimes appear without warning, blotting out the horizon and creating disorienting conditions in seconds. Even experienced mariners can be caught by violent squalls, which combine wind, rain, and turbulent waters into a nearly unmanageable force. The Strait's geography amplifies these effects, funneling air and water currents into sudden bursts that can overturn small vessels or sweep swimmers into deeper channels. Reports of missing vessels during such storms show that disaster can strike even under temporary skies of calm. Swimmers who enter the water for routine crossings occasionally disappear entirely, leaving observers without explanation. In some cases, locals note individuals leaving from safe shorelines or crossing familiar channels only to vanish midstream. No footprints or struggles are observed, and currents often show no clear path of removal. Despite constant vigilance and the availability of modern safety equipment, the Strait seems to have a way of claiming individuals quietly and efficiently. Scholars and maritime authorities continue to examine patterns of disappearance, yet the Strait defies any consistent theory. Research into tidal models, historical shipping routes, and eyewitness reports reveals no simple explanation that accounts for every case. Each disappearance seems to follow its own rules, sometimes occurring in broad daylight, sometimes at night, sometimes in calm seas, sometimes amid storms. The absence of predictable patterns adds to the sense of mystery, and authorities acknowledge the limits of understanding the strait's full behaviour. Those who navigate the passage carry a quiet awareness that the water itself can overwhelm even careful planning in an instant. Ferries, yachts and fishing boats ply the strait daily, yet each crossing is approached with caution and respect for the unseen hazards beneath. Even modern technology and navigation systems cannot eliminate the strait's inherent danger, and those familiar with it speak in hushed tones of the tragedies that have occurred. The stories of vanished crews and missing travellers linger in memory, and every journey serves as a reminder of what the waters can conceal. The Strait of Messina conceals what it takes, and every wave may carry a story that will never reach the surface. The Atacama Desert interior, Chile. The sun blazes relentlessly over a landscape where water rarely touches the sand, and those who enter are immediately at the mercy of the desert's extremes. The Atacama Desert interior, one of the driest places on Earth, stretches across northern Chile in a vast expanse of salt flats, rocky plains and jagged canyons. For centuries, travellers, explorers and miners have vanished within this unforgiving terrain, leaving only traces that quickly fade under relentless winds and shifting sands. Maps and satellite imagery may chart the landscape, but they cannot convey the disorienting scale or the silent, pervasive threat that the desert poses to those who venture too far. Explorers from the 19th century often vanished without a trace, leaving only hastily scrawled notes or abandoned equipment behind. Mining expeditions seeking mineral wealth, survey teams mapping the terrain, and itinerant travellers all entered the interior with careful preparation, yet some never returned. In certain historical accounts, journals recovered months or years later describe disorientation, sudden exhaustion, and water scarcity, ending abruptly as if the desert had absorbed the writer entirely. Authorities at the time documented these cases, yet no bodies or clear evidence were ever recovered, leaving the incidents enshrouded in mystery. Shifting salt flats and cracked earth create treacherous footing, turning routine travel into a deadly gamble for the unprepared. The desert's surface is deceptive. Salt pans can be thin and brittle, hiding soft ground beneath that swallows boots, gear, and sometimes entire packs. Loose stones and jagged rock formations make it easy to lose balance or misjudge distance, while the intense reflection of sunlight on the white crusts can disorient even seasoned explorers. Every step becomes a challenge, and one miscalculation can quickly escalate into life-threatening conditions. Heat mirages rise across the horizon, distorting distances and leading even experienced travellers into dangerous dead ends. Water appears to shimmer in the distance, only to vanish as one approaches. Travellers report paths that seem clear at first glance, suddenly ending at sheer cliffs or deep crevices. In Atacama, perception itself can betray a person, creating false trails and a sense of progress that may be entirely illusory. These optical illusions have been noted in reports from geologists, hikers, and local guides alike, emphasizing the desert's capacity to deceive the senses. In recent decades, hikers and scientific teams have disappeared while navigating remote trails, their absence noted only when they fail to return. Researchers studying geological formations or rare flora often undertake excursions into isolated regions, sometimes for days at a time. Even with radios, GPS devices, and emergency provisions, individuals have vanished with no trace of their passage. Search efforts are frequently hindered by the vastness of the terrain, the rapid dispersal of evidence by wind, and the sheer remoteness of many of the routes. The desert's isolation magnifies every challenge, making search operations both slow and perilous for those attempting to recover missing individuals. Helicopters and vehicles can reach only limited areas, and ground teams must navigate unstable salt flats, sharp rock, and sudden drops. There are documented cases in which search parties were forced to abandon their efforts due to unsafe conditions, leaving disappearances unresolved. The environment itself becomes a barrier, erasing evidence faster than humans can collect it. Exhaustion and dehydration intensify the effects of disorientation, leaving travellers vulnerable to the harsh elements before help can arrive. Temperatures swing wildly, reaching scorching highs during the day and freezing lows at night, while the thin, dry air accelerates water loss. A single misstep in rationing or navigation can turn into a fatal chain reaction, and individuals who appeared capable and prepared may succumb quickly. Medical reports confirm that even experienced explorers are not immune to heat stroke, kidney failure, or collapse under the desert's relentless conditions. Cratered terrain, deep canyons, and hidden ravines can erase all signs of movement, hiding any evidence of those who vanish. Geological studies show that volcanic remnants, sinkholes, and eroded valleys create pockets where footprints and tracks vanish almost immediately. Local guides describe areas where travellers can step for hours without leaving any trace, swallowed by gullies or salt-encrusted depressions. Even aerial searches often fail to reveal anything beyond the desolate surface, leaving disappearances shrouded in mystery. Local guides recount regions where travellers simply seem to disappear into the horizon, their fates unknown and unexplained. Indigenous communities have long regarded certain parts of the interior as places where the land itself exerts an almost supernatural influence. While these beliefs are framed in cultural terms, they coincide with documented hazards. Areas with scarce water, unpredictable terrain, and extreme solar exposure. Even modern mapping and satellite imagery cannot fully capture the deceptive continuity of these barren expanses, where a missing person can vanish without a trace. Scientists studying the desert note areas where the combination of wind, terrain, and temperature shifts can obscure tracks almost immediately. Meteorological data indicate that sudden gusts and seasonal storms can alter sand deposits rapidly, erasing footprints and collapsing fragile salt crusts. Temperature inversions and reflective surfaces interfere with optical detection methods, making both human and drone searches unreliable in certain sectors. Patterns of disappearance often align with these volatile environmental conditions, yet some cases remain unexplained even under favourable weather, deepening the mystery. With warnings issued and modern equipment at hand, explorers still push into the interior, compelled by the challenge and the desert's unanswered enigmas. Tourists, scientists, and adventurers continue to traverse long-abandoned trails, drawn by the beauty, isolation, and scientific intrigue of one of the planet's most extreme environments. Each expedition carries the quiet knowledge that a single misstep or sudden misfortune could render a person permanently lost, leaving only the desert as witness. The interior of the Atacama remains both a place of fascination and a silent enigma, its secrets held beneath unbroken salt and rock. In the heart of the Atacama, the desert swallows those who venture too far, leaving only emptiness where stories should remain. Nahani Valley, Northwest Territories. Silence in the canyons can be sudden, broken only by a rushing river or the echo of distant rocks, yet some who pass through never emerge to tell what they heard. The valley, part of the Mackenzie Mountains in Canada's Northwest Territories, has long drawn explorers, prospectors, and adventurers with its rugged terrain, winding rivers, and unbroken wilderness. Travellers often enter with preparation and knowledge, but the landscape conceals dangers that turn ordinary excursions into deadly mysteries. Documented disappearances date back over a century, and the frequency with which people vanish here has earned the region a reputation as one of the world's most enigmatic wilderness zones. Reports of lost parties are scattered across decades, yet in most cases no remains, personal belongings, or explanations have ever surfaced. Records from early prospectors describe trails that seemed straightforward at first, only to vanish into narrow gorges and hidden crevices. Gold rushes and small-scale mining expeditions brought men into the valley in the early 1900s, yet more than a few failed to return. Logs preserved in mining company archives occasionally mention missing guides or parties who simply disappeared between the falls and the rapids. While some were initially assumed to have been swept away by rivers or trapped in snow, repeated investigations revealed inconsistencies, equipment left behind, tracks ending abruptly, and reports from indigenous communities describing travellers who never emerged. These accounts form the foundation of the valley's modern mystery, establishing a pattern that persists to this day. Steep walls rise on either side of the rivers, creating shadows that hide sudden drops and pockets where travellers could disappear without warning. Vertical cliffs, carved over millennia by glacial movement and rushing water, produce isolated areas inaccessible even to experienced climbers. Some sections of the valley are cut off from one another by narrow passes, forcing anyone moving through to follow paths where a single misstep could be fatal. The combination of jagged rock, slippery surfaces, and unpredictable terrain ensures that once a person enters certain areas, physical obstacles alone can account for the disappearance of evidence. Yet even this does not fully explain why entire parties vanish without a trace, leaving the imagination to wander in the absence of concrete explanation. Weather shifts in an instant, bringing freezing winds and torrential rain that transform the valley's passages into perilous channels. Sudden snow, squalls in winter, or flash flooding in spring can create conditions in which even the most skilled travellers are unprepared. The narrow gorges amplify wind speeds and funnel water rapidly, often turning calm rivers into dangerous torrents in minutes. Official meteorological records show that storms in the Mackenzie Mountains can emerge quickly and without warning, contributing to the high risk for anyone in exposed areas. For some who vanished, accounts from companions or last sightings suggest that weather alone cannot account for the total disappearance of parties and their equipment. Canoes and rafts have been found abandoned along the riverbanks, their crews gone, leaving no indication of struggle or direction. In several documented cases, craft were discovered floating upright and intact or beached on sandbars, yet no one was inside or nearby. Supplies and personal items often remained undisturbed, suggesting that the individuals did not simply drown or fall overboard, or that if they did, they were carried away by forces not fully understood. Local authorities and search teams have described these findings as among the most perplexing in North American wilderness investigations, as they defy conventional explanations and suggest circumstances beyond ordinary accidents. Search parties often arrive too late, hampered by terrain so rugged that even experienced trackers cannot follow the faintest trace. Helicopter reconnaissance can be limited by narrow canyons, unpredictable winds, and dense vegetation, while ground teams face the constant threat of sudden drops, loose rock, and treacherous riverbanks. In numerous cases, searchers report seeing only undisturbed landscapes where signs of human passage should exist. Even when searches are launched immediately, the geography seems to erase all evidence, leaving authorities with nothing but unanswered questions. Exhaustion and hypothermia combine in unexpected ways, stripping even skilled adventurers of judgment before they can escape danger. The valley's isolation makes rescue slow, and the combination of long treks, cold water immersion, and steep climbs can incapacitate even those accustomed to harsh environments. Many disappearances involve travellers who are familiar with northern wilderness conditions, suggesting that fatigue alone does not explain the complete erasure of individuals from the landscape. These human vulnerabilities intersect with natural hazards in ways that make the valley exceptionally unforgiving. Caverns and underground pools hide evidence of those lost, swallowing footprints, supplies, and sometimes entire vessels without leaving a clue. The geology of the region includes limestone caves, sinkholes, and underground channels that remain largely unexplored. Waterfalls and rapids can funnel debris into deep pools, while hidden caves can trap explorers out of sight. Geological surveys confirm that much of the terrain is unstable, but the complete absence of recoverable remains in so many cases exceeds what natural hazards alone would predict, reinforcing the valley's reputation as a place of extraordinary disappearance. Indigenous elders recount stories of travellers who entered certain areas and simply ceased to exist, warnings grounded in observation as much as tradition. Oral histories passed down over generations speak of locations where hunters, trappers, and visitors vanish without a sound or a trace, and these accounts often coincide with areas now linked to modern disappearances. While these stories are treated with respect and recognised as part of cultural knowledge, they also align with documented cases, lending additional weight to the observation that the valley exhibits patterns of disappearance that have persisted for centuries. Even with maps, radios, and satellite tracking, adventurers face disorientation and sudden obstacles that can vanish any trail of passage. Modern technology has reduced some risks, but the interplay of cliffs, currents, and hidden terrain continues to frustrate rescue and exploration efforts. Several recent incidents involved groups equipped with GPS and satellite phones, yet they still failed to return or left no evidence of their movements. This suggests that the valley's challenges operate on levels that defy straightforward navigation and remain beyond complete human control. Explorers continue to journey into the valley, drawn by the allure of the unknown and the same mysteries that have claimed countless lives before them. Scientific teams, adventure enthusiasts, and documentary crews are among those who venture in, often prepared for extreme conditions, yet still confronted with the valley's enigmatic patterns. The combination of natural beauty, historical intrigue, and unsolved vanishings ensures that Nahani Valley continues to hold fascination for those seeking both adventure and the unexplained. In the depths of Nahani Valley, the canyons hold secrets that refuse to surface, preserving the stories of those who vanished as if the wilderness itself remembers them. The Nullarbor Plain, Australia. A horizon that stretches without interruption can be as disorienting as any forest or canyon, and along the Nullarbor Plain, travellers have vanished where the earth seems to extend endlessly. The plain spans more than 200,000 square kilometres, a limestone desert that stretches across southern Australia, its name meaning no trees in Latin. The emptiness is profound, broken only by the occasional roadhouse or railway siding, yet even in this stark openness, human presence seems fleeting. Records indicate that people entering this vast expanse sometimes fail to emerge at the next settlement, leaving nothing but unanswered questions in the wake of their journeys. Early explorers recorded not only the challenges of crossing the arid expanse, but also the unsettling absence of those who never returned from routine treks between settlements. Surveyors, telegraph workers, and early settlers documented their routes, often noting when companions disappeared without explanation. These disappearances were recorded with precise dates and locations, yet follow-up investigations yielded no evidence, no trace, leaving empty tracks across the map where lives simply ended. The plain's flatness seems to amplify both the psychological and practical difficulty of tracking anyone who vanishes, and decades of reports reveal a troubling consistency. Temperatures soar and drop with a sudden cruelty, the sun beating down on the limestone soil while nights bring bone-deep cold that tests the limits of human endurance. Travellers unprepared for the extremes face dehydration and heat stroke, yet even the well-equipped occasionally fail to reach their destinations. Water sources are scarce, and the ground's reflective surface intensifies the sun's rays, producing mirages that confuse direction. While environmental conditions explain some disappearances, they do not account for those found in apparently safe sections, or for cases in which vehicles or gear remain abandoned without their owners. Motorists and prospectors have disappeared in seemingly mundane circumstances, leaving behind vehicles or supplies, but no trace of the individuals themselves. Cars have been discovered parked along remote stretches of the air highway, with fuel untouched and possessions inside, yet the drivers never reported. Prospectors venturing into limestone caves or across salt flats have vanished, their equipment left behind, as though erased by the plain itself. Each instance reinforces the idea that the Nullarbor does not simply challenge navigation, it conceals people in ways that defy ordinary logic. Even along rail lines and the air highway, routes frequented by trucks, trains and travellers, stories of inexplicable disappearances persist, defying expectations of human oversight. The Trans-Australian Railway cuts a linear path across the desert, yet workers and passengers have sometimes gone missing between stations. Searches along these tracks often turn up nothing, suggesting that the openness which should provide security instead leaves travellers extraordinarily vulnerable to vanishing entirely. The juxtaposition of civilization and emptiness only deepens the mystery, as disappearances occur in spaces where help might theoretically arrive quickly. Monotony of landscape can erode both perception and judgment, and the Nullabor's endless flatness has left seasoned travellers lost in a place that offers no reference points. Travellers report that the horizon blends sky and land, making it nearly impossible to determine direction. There are even experienced navigators, relying on compasses or maps, sometimes find themselves wandering in circles. The mental strain imposed by such uniformity appears to amplify human error, yet it cannot fully explain the total lack of remains in certain cases, suggesting that the plain's secrets extend beyond simple disorientation. Search efforts are often frustrated by sheer scale. Aircraft may sweep the horizon for miles, but a person can vanish without a sign into the vast expanse. Ground searches encounter salt flats, dense scrub, and hidden sinkholes, all of which complicate tracking. While modern technology like GPS and satellite imagery assists in mapping, it has not resolved the underlying mystery of why some travellers disappear completely. Even coordinated rescue operations, spanning hours or days, sometimes return with nothing more than empty land and the echo of human absence. Heat stroke, dehydration, and treacherous sinkholes provide partial explanations, yet numerous cases reveal that even when conditions are tolerable, individuals can still vanish entirely. Geological surveys of the region indicate extensive limestone formations riddled with subterranean caves, many of which are unmapped. While some speculate that hidden sinkholes could swallow someone whole, such explanations are insufficient for disappearances occurring on open flatlands or near minor settlements where no natural traps exist. These anomalies reinforce the sense that the plain possesses a unique, almost inexplicable capacity to erase evidence. Local lore whispers of travellers who entered the plain and simply ceased to exist, and Aboriginal oral histories echo with warnings about particular stretches of this remote terrain. Indigenous narratives speak of paths where the earth is restless, of spirits guiding or misleading those who traverse certain sections. Settler accounts echo similar themes, noting stretches of road where travellers went missing under routine conditions. While these stories are framed in cultural language, their persistence and specificity suggest that human experience has long recognised the Nullabor's enigmatic nature. Adventurers, scientists and thrill-seekers are drawn to the Nullarbor even now, their fascination undimmed by decades of unsolved disappearances or the dangers documented in official reports. Tourists attempt the crossing in caravans, endurance drivers attempt record-setting runs, and researchers study the geological and environmental extremes, all while aware of the plain's deadly reputation. Each expedition is a testament to human curiosity, yet the history of unresolved vanishings casts a shadow over even routine travel, leaving an undercurrent of unease in the open air. The expanse may appear deceptively serene, but its very openness conceals anomalies and hazards that seem capable of swallowing those who venture too far from the thin lines of civilization. Roads, tracks, and settlements appear to offer security, yet the stories persist. Vehicles left behind, belongings abandoned, and no further trace of the individuals ever found. The plain challenges expectations of safety, navigation, and survival, demonstrating that absence can occur not only in wilderness or forests, but in spaces defined by vast emptiness. Through the Nullarbor Plain, the land stretches infinite and indifferent, hiding the fates of those who vanished as if the desert itself remembers what it refuses to reveal. Lake Okeechobee's southern marshes, Florida. Early morning mist clings to the water's edge, and somewhere within the reeds, a person can disappear without a ripple or a sound. The southern marshes of Lake Okeechobee stretch in tangled networks of shallow channels, sawgrass and floating vegetation, creating a landscape that seems simultaneously inviting and impenetrable. Canoes, small boats and wading paths wind through the wetlands, yet the dense undergrowth and the reflective surface of the water can render even familiar areas disorienting. For decades, locals, fishermen and occasional travellers have vanished here without explanation, leaving behind boats still moored to the banks or supplies untouched on the shore. Unlike more isolated wildernesses, these waters are heavily trafficked, yet the marsh seems to absorb individuals, offering no trace of their passage. Settlers and indigenous communities alike recorded instances of travellers who set out for the marshes and were never heard from again, their stories folded into whispered warnings that persisted long after initial reports. Seminal oral histories recount missing hunters and guides whose trails ended abruptly, with their dogs returning alone or food caches undisturbed. In the early 20th century, European settlers spoke of men who disappeared while tending cattle or checking levees, and government records hint at investigations into missing surveyors or riverboat workers. Despite these accounts, there is no comprehensive record of why people vanished, only recurring patterns, proximity to water, sudden isolation, and the total absence of remains. Twisting channels and hidden inlets make it easy to misjudge distance, yet vanishings have occurred even near well-travelled banks where navigation should be simple. The marsh's geography is deceptive. What appears as shallow water may conceal deep peat bogs, and small rises of dry land can be surrounded by treacherous mud. Tidal fluctuations and wind can shift water levels within hours, altering landmarks and paths. Even the most experienced guides can find themselves surrounded by identical stretches of reeds, the horizon lost in a mirror of sky and water, and suddenly the familiar becomes alien. Boats are sometimes found adrift or tethered to the shore, with no sign of their occupants, as if the marsh itself has claimed them. Investigators have documented cases where vessels drifted from their moorings overnight, fishing gear intact, yet the people were nowhere to be found. In several instances, personal belongings like backpacks, radios, or life jackets were left behind, raising questions about whether the missing were swept away by natural hazards, disoriented by the landscape, or removed by forces that remain unknown. The eerie consistency of these patterns has given the area a reputation that blends caution with fear, even among locals who have traversed these waters safely for decades. Rainstorms can sweep across the lake in minutes, transforming familiar paths into labyrinths that confound both experience and intuition. Thunderstorms roll in with almost imperceptible warning, and sudden downpours can mask trails, obscure floating debris, and turn firm ground into sucking mud. Lightning strikes are frequent in the summer months, forcing anyone on exposed banks or small boats into sudden retreat. Yet, not all disappearances correspond to extreme weather. Many occur on clear, calm days when conditions seem favourable for travel, deepening the mystery of the marsh's ability to swallow people entirely. Wildlife abounds, from snapping alligators to dense mosquito clouds, yet these hazards rarely explain the complete absence of bodies or belongings. Alligators are known to inhabit the southern edges of Lake Okeechobee, and their presence can deter search parties from close investigation, but attacks are extremely rare and rarely result in the total erasure of evidence. Likewise, snakes, panthers, and venomous insects complicate movement and add risk, but documented cases show that even cautious, knowledgeable travellers can vanish with nothing recovered. The marsh's ecosystem seems to provide cover rather than cause for disappearance, emphasising the enigma rather than offering a solution. Disorientation is common. The still waters reflect the sky so perfectly that horizons dissolve, and even seasoned navigators can lose all sense of direction. Reflections on the water and uniform vegetation patterns can create optical illusions, making it impossible to distinguish one channel from another. Compasses and GPS devices sometimes fail or mislead, particularly in areas where magnetic anomalies have been recorded in geological surveys. Experienced hunters and boaters report feeling that time and distance become warped in these marshes, with hours spent seemingly motionless or miles covered unnoticed. Folktales describe areas where spirits linger, or the land resists human intrusion, and locals avoid certain channels after sundown for reasons that blend tradition with observation. Seminole, Miccosukee, and early settler accounts speak of waters that move people, or sections where stepping off a path leads to sudden disappearance. These stories, often dismissed by outsiders as superstition, carry cautionary weight for those who respect them, and their persistence over centuries lends a cultural depth to what might otherwise appear as purely environmental hazards. Recent accounts show that modern equipment, GPS devices, radios, even aerial surveillance, cannot guarantee safety in the marshes, leaving experienced adventurers vulnerable. Search and rescue operations have deployed boats, helicopters, and sonar equipment, yet countless individuals remain unlocated. Some disappearances involve tourists or scientific teams following marked routes, suggesting that the risk is not limited to the inexperienced. Even in cases where vessels or vehicles are found, their occupants are missing, highlighting a pattern of vanishing that defies straightforward explanation. Shifting peat, hidden sinkholes, and fluctuating water levels make it possible for evidence of a person to vanish entirely, as if the land conspires to hide its secrets. Underwater pockets of dense peat can swallow small craft or shoes, leaving no trace at the surface. Channels can silt over quickly, erasing footprints, dropped items, or other clues. In combination with the marsh's reflective waters and dense vegetation, these features contribute to the inability of search teams to locate missing individuals, leaving each case unresolved despite thorough investigation. Into these waters continue to go explorers, fishermen, and researchers, drawn by both curiosity and necessity, aware that some who ventured before never returned. The southern marshes remain vital for fishing, research, and recreation, yet every trip carries the unspoken tension of historical vanishings. Maps mark paths and levees, but the marsh itself holds a record invisible to human measurement, a quiet reminder of those who have been claimed without explanation. In the southern marshes of Lake Okeechobee, water and reeds conceal the vanished, leaving their fates entwined with the swamp's most hidden depths. The Tibetan Plateau's remote crossings. Records from centuries of trade and pilgrimage hint at journeys that abruptly ended, leaving chroniclers puzzled. The Tibetan Plateau, vast and elevated beyond most human settlements, has long challenged even the hardiest travellers, and within its remote crossings, countless individuals have disappeared without explanation. While the region is known for its cultural and religious significance, the high-altitude routes are simultaneously places of mystery, where the ordinary rules of travel seem to falter and where entire expeditions have failed to reach their intended destinations. Written testimonies and historical accounts suggest that these vanishings are not isolated incidents, but recurring phenomena spanning centuries. Observers throughout history have documented travellers who entered these passes but never returned, their absence lingering as an unresolved enigma. Manuscripts from local monasteries note individuals who departed for distant passes and were never seen again. Monks and scribes recorded pilgrimages, often noting the weather, terrain, and companions in detail, only to end abruptly when the traveller disappeared. These entries, sometimes sparse and sometimes meticulous, reveal the perplexity and anxiety that blank spaces in the narrative could inspire. Certain high passes became associated with these unresolved cases, and travellers were sometimes advised to take alternative routes or delay their journeys until conditions seemed less ominous. Even then, the disappearances continued, suggesting that no level of preparation could fully counter the plateau's inexplicable hazards. Ancient maps mark routes that today are associated with unexplained vanishings, their significance long debated. Scholars examining these maps have observed anomalies, trails that appear carefully charted but correspond to areas with multiple documented disappearances. The juxtaposition of accurate geographic knowledge and unexplained absences raises questions about whether physical challenges alone can account for the phenomenon. Some paths cross glacial fields, while others traverse high passes with sudden drops or unsteady footing, yet disappearances have occurred in areas without obvious danger, confounding conventional reasoning. Official reports describe how entire caravans occasionally lost members without any signs of struggle or accident. In some cases, surviving travellers recounted that companions had simply stepped away and never rejoined the group, leaving behind equipment or provisions untouched. Rescue parties were often limited by altitude, weather, and logistical constraints, yet even when expeditions reached the last known location, they found no conclusive evidence of what happened. These gaps in explanation became part of local law, emphasizing the region's reputation for erasing all traces of human presence under conditions that appear superficially unremarkable. Historical documents reveal that certain crossings became taboo after repeated unexplained disappearances. In these areas, local guidance evolved into a strict oral tradition, warning against solitary travel and advising caution even for experienced mountaineers. These social conventions reflect an acknowledgement of repeated, unexplainable incidents rather than simple superstition. Anthropologists studying the plateau have noted that communities retain memory of vanished travellers through stories, place names, and ritual practices, suggesting that the disappearances had a profound impact on the collective consciousness. Written logs from explorers often conclude with sudden gaps in the narrative, as if the vanish simply ceased to exist. Diaries from early 20th century expeditions, for instance, show meticulous attention to altitude, provisions, and the health of each party member, yet abruptly end when a disappearance occurred. Modern historians examining these texts find the omissions as compelling as any direct observation, emphasizing the abrupt and total nature of the vanishings. The phenomenon resists rational categorization, defying conventional explanations for loss in high-altitude regions. Archival correspondences describe search efforts that recovered supplies and equipment, but never the missing persons themselves. In several documented cases, items were discovered in locations that suggested normal travel, yet the individuals associated with them had vanished. Dogs and tracking parties could locate the equipment but not the people, leaving investigators with only partial clues and mounting frustration. This consistent pattern of material evidence without human remains distinguishes the Tibetan Plateau's disappearances from ordinary wilderness accidents and deepens the mystery surrounding the crossings. Patterns of absence noted in trade logs suggest risks concentrated along specific high-altitude passages. Researchers analysing centuries of caravan records observed that disappearances were more frequent on certain stretches, often corresponding with abrupt weather shifts, thin air, or challenging terrain. Yet the irregularity of incidents, where some journeys ended successfully under similar conditions, implies that environmental factors alone cannot account for all vanishings. Statistical studies indicate that some form of anomaly, still unidentified, might contribute to the repeated selective nature of these disappearances. Contemporary scholars examining records of these journeys remain unable to account for why some travellers never returned. Anthropologists, mountaineers, and historians converge in their analysis of the phenomenon, yet no single theory resolves the mystery. Proposed explanations range from disorientation and altitude sickness to environmental hazards and rare seismic events. Even advanced modern technology, including satellite tracking and GPS, has failed to reproduce or explain the historical disappearances, suggesting that the phenomenon may involve factors that remain hidden to observation. Religious texts from plateau communities occasionally reference warnings about the impassable nature of certain remote crossings. These writings, sometimes cryptic or symbolic, indicate a cultural awareness of the risks that extended beyond practical guidance. In some cases, the disappearances are woven into moral or spiritual narratives, implying that human understanding of the high crossings is inherently limited. Whether interpreted literally or allegorically, these texts reflect centuries of encounters with phenomena that defy explanation and highlight the enduring tension between human ambition and the plateau's inscrutable power. Reports spanning centuries consistently emphasize the plateau's ability to erase all evidence, leaving only uncertainty behind. Travelers, both historical and modern, have vanished without warning, leaving companions, possessions, and all traces of their journey behind. Searches and investigations, no matter how methodical or advanced, repeatedly fail to produce answers, cementing the crossing's reputation as places where human presence can dissolve inexplicably. The combination of historical documentation, cultural acknowledgement, and persistent absence creates a narrative in which the Tibetan plateau itself seems to guard its secrets, indifferent to inquiry or intervention. The high crossings conceal their truths, and the questions left behind deepen with every passing year. The Scottish Highlands' isolated glens. A hush settles over the Highlands' remote valleys, where the terrain folds inward and swallows anyone who ventures too far. The glens, carved over millennia by glacial activity, conceal narrow paths that wind between cliffs, bogs, and dense patches of woodland. From the outside, these valleys appear serene, dotted with streams and heather, yet they have claimed travellers whose fates remain a mystery. Local lore hints at an enduring danger, one that has persisted despite improved maps, marked trails, and modern navigation tools. Records of disappearances, while scattered, form a pattern that draws uneasy attention from those who study unexplained vanishing across the world. The Highlands glens are not the most remote terrain in Scotland, yet their combination of natural complexity and environmental unpredictability has led to incidents that defy conventional explanation. Some who enter these secluded valleys do not return, leaving nothing more than unsettled communities and unanswered questions. Even today, hikers are advised to carry GPS and communicate their routes, though these precautions offer no guarantee against the unknown forces or accidents that inhabit the folds of the land. The glen's silence seems almost deliberate, as if the terrain itself preserves the absence of those who once passed through. Narratives reveal travellers and shepherds vanishing along narrow passes, leaving behind only abandoned packs or scattered belongings. 19th century parish records describe shepherds failing to return from routine rounds, their flocks found unattended, and their trails ending inexplicably. Tales of lost drovers circulated for decades, blending with folklore about spirits and territorial curses, though documented evidence remains sparse. The combination of challenging topography and sudden weather shifts complicates any search, even when neighbours or family quickly mobilise. In some cases, only a boot, a walking stick, or a jacket would be discovered days later, offering minimal clues. The absence of bodies or conclusive evidence frustrates investigators, leaving both authorities and families with a lingering sense of incompletion. This historical pattern has shaped the reputation of certain glens as inherently dangerous, where vanishing is not just a possibility, but a recurring phenomenon. Stories passed down through villages speak of glens avoided for generations, where eerie echoes and sudden fogs seem to mark unseen hazards. Residents often describe an unsettling quality to the air, a sensation that one is being watched or that familiar landmarks shift unexpectedly. Folklorists have noted that many of these tales are attached to glens with a history of unexplained disappearances, reinforcing a cultural memory of risk. While the stories mix superstition with anecdotal observation, some incidents have been corroborated through local press archives, confirming that vanishing occurs in ways that defy rational explanation. Visitors report disorientation and difficulty retracing their steps even under clear conditions, an effect that only adds weight to the legends. These inherited narratives serve as cautionary markers, quietly influencing the behaviour of anyone entering the valleys. Rugged cliffs, hidden peat bogs, and meandering streams create a labyrinth that confounds even experienced navigators. Explorers describe walking familiar routes only to find themselves off track after moments of distraction or sudden fog. Maps may indicate paths, but terrain shifts, seasonal flooding, and uneven ground render traditional navigation unreliable. The glen's natural traps are deceptively subtle. A seemingly shallow bog can swallow footwear or conceal the direction of travel, while dense undergrowth hides clear markers. Surveyors and cartographers working in the Highlands have long noted these anomalies, emphasising the challenge of accurately representing the glens on a map. Even with aerial reconnaissance and GPS technology, the glens maintain an ability to confuse and mislead, creating conditions where individuals can vanish entirely. In the 20th century, hikers and explorers reported disappearing without warning, sparking searches that yielded little more than footprints fading into mist. Newspapers from Inverness and surrounding towns occasionally chronicled cases of missing mountaineers, climbers, and walkers who failed to return from excursions that should have been routine. Search parties combed trails, rivers, and ridges, often joined by volunteers and local authorities, yet physical evidence remained elusive. Some searches extended for weeks, employing tracking dogs, aerial surveys, and ground expeditions, but results were minimal. These disappearances did not follow a single pattern. They occurred during good weather, clear visibility, and well-marked paths, suggesting that ordinary environmental hazards alone could not explain them. Magnetic shifts and persistent fogs have been recorded in certain glens, conditions that disorient and complicate attempts to follow familiar trails. Geophysical studies have shown that localized variations in the Earth's magnetic field can affect compasses, subtly altering the perceived direction of travel. Climbers have reported instruments malfunctioning or behaving erratically, compounding confusion in areas already difficult to traverse. Fog and mist often settle without warning, and when combined with uneven ground and sudden elevation changes, even experienced hikers can lose orientation quickly. These factors, while documented, still fail to account fully for the complete absence of some missing persons, leaving the mystery unresolved. Some glens contain remnants of sacred sites, cairns, and old settlements, hinting at long-standing human reverence and caution toward these places. Archaeologists have found traces of Bronze Age and medieval habitation, suggesting that these valleys were not only traversed but carefully respected. Cairns and stone markers may have served as navigational aids, ceremonial structures, or warnings of natural hazards. The persistence of folklore around disappearances in these areas aligns with historical evidence of human activity, indicating a deep cultural awareness of risk within the glens. This mixture of history, ritual, and danger contributes to the aura of incompleteness that surrounds every account of someone lost in these isolated valleys. The irregularity of the glen's dangers is striking. One visitor may traverse safely while another disappears under identical conditions. Weather, visibility, skill, and preparation sometimes make no discernible difference in the outcome. Locals speak in hushed tones of glens where the ground seems to swallow travellers selectively, an observation difficult to quantify but repeatedly noted in oral accounts. The randomness of these events intensifies their unsettling nature, reinforcing the perception that some forces or conditions operate beyond ordinary explanation. Local authorities, volunteer search parties, and modern tracking methods have all failed to fully account for the missing, leaving families without closure. Police records confirm the deployment of extensive resources to recover lost hikers and mountaineers, yet few cases ever reached resolution. The combination of rugged terrain, shifting weather, and subtle natural traps hampers recovery efforts, while the lack of physical evidence transforms each disappearance into a lingering enigma. Even decades later, stories persist, echoing in local memory and official documentation without offering definitive answers. Today, the glens continue to draw hikers, climbers, and researchers who balance curiosity with the quiet menace that pervades these valleys. Tourists follow well-marked trails and guided routes, but some venture off the beaten path, drawn by a desire to explore the hidden reaches that have claimed others. Outdoor clubs, adventure groups, and scientific teams frequently operate in the area, documenting flora, fauna, and geological features, yet none have solved the persistent mystery of the disappearances. The allure of the glens lies in their combination of beauty, history, and unresolved danger, maintaining a tension between human curiosity and natural enigma. The Highlands glens retain a persistent air of incompleteness, a place where absence is as tangible as the mountains themselves. Even as hikers pass through and researchers record details, the valleys seem to resist full understanding, preserving secrets in quiet shadows. Every search, every account, every failed recovery contributes to the sense that these glens operate under rules that are partly known, partly unknowable, and entirely unforgiving. The paths vanish into shadow, and the glens keep their secrets long after the footsteps have disappeared. The Amazon's upper tributaries. Deep within the vast network of slow-moving channels and narrow upper tributaries that weave through the Amazon basin, there are stretches of rainforest so remote, so thick with life and silence, that modern maps and satellite images capture little more than a shifting bewilderment of greens and browns. In this region, where the Rio Negro and the Purus send countless smaller streams into the labyrinthine interior, travellers who have disappeared are sometimes never found at all, and the rainforest seems to absorb their existence into its own perpetual cycle of growth and decay. These upper tributaries, swallowed by a canopy that rarely lets sunlight touch the dark waters, are places where even organised searchers can fail to recover the most rudimentary trace of a missing person, leaving only unanswered questions and a creeping sense of dread in their wake. The Amazon rainforest itself is the largest tropical rainforest on Earth, covering millions of square kilometres across Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and several other countries, and its tributaries form a branching network that often resembles a chaotic tree more than a river system. While the great rivers such as the Solimões, Madeira, and Tapajos carry heavy loads of water visible from space, the smaller feeder rivers that comprise the upper reaches twist through impenetrable vegetation and sink into boggy floodplains during the wet season. In these conditions, it is not uncommon for search and rescue operations to be overwhelmed by the scale of the terrain, the inaccessibility of overgrown banks, and the labyrinthine waterways that can mislead even seasoned navigators. In documented accounts of troubling disappearances in this region, such as the highly publicised case of British journalist Dom Phillips and Brazilian indigenous expert Bruno Pereira, the search teams combed tributary waterways in Brazil's Javari Valley with increasing desperation. The pair vanished in June 2022 while travelling by boat along the lower reaches of the Itaquai River, a tributary that feeds into the broader Amazon system, and for days there were no confirmed signs of their whereabouts despite extensive efforts by indigenous groups, federal police and volunteers. Items believed to belong to them, including Phillips's backpack and Pereira's clothing, were found tied to submerged trees during the search, but no definitive trace of the two men emerged for a long period, underscoring how quickly the rainforest can erase human presence. The Javari Valley itself is one of the most remote corners of the Brazilian Amazon, bordering both Peru and Colombia, and contains the second largest indigenous territory in Brazil, where isolated tribes have persisted for generations. These headwaters and tributaries cut through territory that is largely inaccessible by road and can only be reached by long boat journeys or treks through thick brush and swamps. For government officials and search parties, the challenge of navigating these networks is compounded by rising tensions between indigenous inhabitants, illegal loggers, poachers and armed groups, making the terrain not only physically forbidding but socially fraught. Explorers and anthropologists have long noted that the upper tributaries of the Amazon are areas where entire communities have once vanished or fled deeper into the jungle, leaving little behind but overgrown clearings or abandoned house frames reclaimed by vines. During the rubber boom of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, catastrophic violence and exploitation led to the decimation and displacement of many indigenous groups along tributaries of the Putumayo and nearby rivers, and some tribes were driven so deep into the forest that outsiders lost all knowledge of their whereabouts. Known historically as the Putumayo Genocide, this brutal chapter saw tens of thousands of indigenous people enslaved, tortured or killed, effectively obliterating entire networks of settlements along lesser-known waterways. Because these tributaries often flood extensively during the rainy season, the patterns of travel and survival are unpredictable. In the absence of marked trails or visible landmarks, the swollen waters can carry boats far from their intended course, and the thick jungle canopy effectively conceals movement from above. Satellite tracking reveals a mosaic of waterways that expand and contract with seasonal rains, and for anyone lost in this aqueous maze, the border between river and forest can blur into a monotony of drowned trees and muddy banks that offer no easy path back to safety. In addition to the geographical challenges, the rainforest environment is harsh and indifferent to human life. Predatory animals such as jaguars, anacondas and caimans inhabit many of the upper tributaries, and biting insects and disease-carrying parasites thrive in stagnant pools and slow currents. The dense vegetation of the rainforest can make even short distances exhausting to traverse on foot, while the threat of tropical illnesses like malaria and dengue fever looms over those who linger too long in wet spots or spend nights without adequate shelter. Despite advances in technology, the effort to locate missing persons in these remote reaches remains daunting. Search teams equipped with helicopters and drones often find their signals lost beneath a thick canopy, where thermal imaging yields little difference between animal and human heat signatures. In some cases, the very tools that might aid a rescue become moot when heavy rains push satellite coverage to focus on flooding rather than fine detail, and the dense forest continues its silent dominion. Not all disappearances in the upper tributaries end without a trace, but many do, leaving only circumstantial evidence gathered days or weeks later. In a number of recorded cases, items such as clothing, personal gear, or abandoned boats have been discovered strewn along riverbanks, yet no sign of the individuals themselves ever emerges. The muddy waters of the Amazon, so rich with sediment and debris, can quickly bury human remains or carry them far downstream, beyond the reach of searches confined to a limited radius around the last known location. Oral histories passed down by indigenous communities speak of people who entered the forest and never returned, stories that are sometimes attributed to encounters with spirits of the unknown waters, or simply the inexorable power of the jungle itself. For elders who have spent their lives on the banks of these tributaries, the rainforest is not merely an ecosystem, but a presence that devours footsteps, reshapes the land, and erases memory as easily as it obscures the path home. Lost in the maze of rainforest and river, their traces vanish into the dark water and green silence, never to be found again. Mount Hood's Upper Wilderness, Oregon. Amid the jagged ridges and glacial slopes of Mount Hood's Upper Wilderness, people have vanished along trails and climbing routes where visibility should have made recovery possible. Timberline Trail, Cooper Spur, and lesser-known climbing paths wind through dense conifer forests and volcanic scree, yet even in areas heavily travelled during summer months, hikers and climbers sometimes disappear without leaving more than a scattered backpack or boot behind. Search and rescue teams are often able to locate equipment or abandoned shelters, but the individuals themselves are never found, swallowed instead by a terrain that combines natural danger with almost impenetrable isolation. Rising to 11,240 feet, Oregon's tallest peak is framed by permanent glaciers and steep volcanic rock fields, a terrain that shifts unpredictably with every season. Mount Hood is an active stratovolcano, part of the Cascade Range, with glacial ice covering roughly 13 square miles of its upper flanks. Crevassed glaciers such as Elliott, Coe and Sandy move imperceptibly over time, concealing channels and fissures that can claim the unwary. Forests of Douglas fir and western hemlock cloak the lower slopes, forming a green labyrinth where trails are often obscured by fallen trees or seasonal snow. The combination of vertical elevation changes, glacial crevasses, and dense forest creates a landscape where human error and environmental unpredictability intersect. Documents of disappearances along the Timberline Trail and Cooper Spur reveal instances where climbers' equipment was recovered, while the individuals themselves were never found. In several documented cases, search teams located backpacks, ropes, and crampons carefully stashed or inadvertently left behind on ledges or snowfields, yet no body or track extended from these items. Climbing and hiking permits issued by the US Forest Service note that even experienced mountaineers occasionally go missing, highlighting that preparation alone does not always guarantee survival in Mount Hood's upper reaches. The presence of well-marked trails and ranger stations paradoxically amplifies the mystery, when a person vanishes without a trace. Sudden snowstorms and dense fog can envelop the upper wilderness in minutes, erasing paths and landmarks that might otherwise guide someone back to safety. Even during late spring and summer, unexpected blizzards or thick cloud cover can reduce visibility to mere feet, leaving climbers disoriented. In such conditions, familiar features such as creeks, ridgelines, and volcanic rock formations can appear unfamiliar, and compasses or GPS devices sometimes become difficult to rely on due to the interplay of weather, topography, and signal interference. The mountain's climate has been studied extensively, yet these rapid changes continue to confound those navigating the slopes. Glacial crevasses and fractured lava rock create hidden voids where even experienced mountaineers can fall out of sight, leaving no trace behind. The Elliott Glacier, which stretches over 4 miles, contains ice chasms that are often concealed by snow bridges or debris. Likewise, the rugged volcanic cliffs along Cooper Spur include fissures and overhangs where a misstep can carry someone beyond reach within seconds. US Forest Service reports note that recovery is sometimes delayed for days due to the treacherous approach, and in certain areas, natural erosion and shifting ice may bury evidence entirely. Human misjudgment, underestimating the mountain's challenges or attempting treacherous routes without proper preparation, often intersects with nature's hazards, producing baffling vanishings. Visitors occasionally ascend the mountain in springtime when melting snow increases the risk of avalanches, or during autumn when early storms can sweep in without warning. Even well-equipped climbers can become fatigued or suffer from hypothermia, leaving them unable to return to known trails. These factors, combined with the mountain's sheer vertical relief and glacial hazards, ensure that a single miscalculation can have consequences that persist indefinitely, leaving rescuers puzzled. Even modern search and rescue operations face limits. Helicopters struggle in high winds, and thermal imaging offers little advantage over snow, rock, and dense evergreen cover. Forested slopes disrupt line of sight, while high ridges and volcanic scree create wind tunnels that scatter sound and obscure scent trails. Drone reconnaissance is often hampered by unpredictable gusts and fog layers that absorb or reflect signals. While search teams meticulously plan grid searches and coordinate ground and aerial teams, these technological advantages are sometimes neutralized by the environment itself, reinforcing the sense that Mount Hood exerts a subtle but powerful dominion over those who enter. Historical eruptions, landslides, and volcanic activity continuously reshape Mount Hood's upper reaches, forming hidden obstacles and unpredictable hazards for anyone traversing them. The last minor eruption, recorded in the 1790s, and repeated volcanic tremors since then, have left the upper slopes littered with loose tephra and unstable lava flows. Glacial retreat has exposed new areas of fractured rock, and seasonal landslides on the southern and western flanks can destroy trails or alter familiar landmarks. Each year, the shifting environment challenges climbers' assumptions about safe passages and increases the likelihood that someone could vanish without leaving evidence behind. Certain remote stretches of the upper wilderness have drawn repeated attention from officials, guides, and climbers due to patterns of inexplicable disappearances over decades. Timberline Trail's northern segments and Cooper Spur's midsection have both been cited in search logs as areas where missing persons are more frequently reported. Park rangers describe the slopes as deceptively calm, yet the terrain can transition abruptly from forested cover to open ice or scree fields, leaving travellers suddenly exposed. These zones are neither cursed nor supernatural, yet their record of vanishings lends them an aura of foreboding among those who know the mountain. Families, friends, and local communities regard Mount Hood's upper slopes with a mixture of reverence and unease, aware that even skilled adventurers can vanish without warning. Memorial plaques and makeshift shrines along trailheads commemorate those lost in climbing or hiking accidents, while the broader population remains aware of media reports detailing inexplicable disappearances. Public safety advisories stress preparation, group travel, and respect for weather warnings, yet the mountain continues to take people in ways that leave no explanation, no closure, and little evidence to satisfy those searching. Seasonal melting, glacial retreat, and shifting scree continue to rewrite the landscape, rendering past search efforts incomplete and leaving the mountain's secrets intact. Each year, previously traversed trails may become impassable, and landmarks that guided climbers can disappear beneath new layers of ice or rockfall. In the upper wilderness, the boundary between safe passage and danger is continually redrawn, leaving those who enter with little assurance that they will leave in the same way. Mount Hood's peak remains a sentinel of natural power, where human presence can vanish as quietly as snowfall over a glacier. On Mount Hood, footprints can vanish as easily as the climbers who leave them, swallowed by ice, rock and shadow without a trace. The Rub al Khali, Empty Quarter, Arabia. Endless waves of sand ripple across the Rub al Khali, a forbidding desert where travellers disappear into the heat and silence, leaving no trace behind. Known as the Empty Quarter, this vast expanse covers roughly 650,000 square kilometres across Saudi Arabia, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen, making it one of the largest sand deserts on the planet. Despite its harshness, it has drawn explorers, traders, and adventurers for centuries, all drawn to its scale and isolation, yet some have vanished entirely, leaving only footprints that are swiftly swallowed by shifting sands and relentless winds. Dunes rise like golden fortresses, some towering over 800 feet, their shapes reshaped daily by relentless desert winds. These towering sand formations create natural barriers that can disorient travellers and force detours over unstable slopes, where a slip can send someone tumbling into deep sand or hidden hollows. The desert's surface is deceptively uniform, yet beneath its apparent monotony lies an ever-changing labyrinth, where the slightest misjudgment can lead to hours or days of aimless wandering with no hope of rescue. Scorching days give way to frigid nights, a brutal swing that strains the body and can turn a simple trek into a fatal challenge. Temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, while winter nights may approach freezing. Exposure to such extremes, combined with a lack of water, leaves even seasoned travellers vulnerable to dehydration, hypothermia, and exhaustion. These conditions, coupled with the sheer emptiness of the terrain, make any disappearance difficult to investigate, as the environment itself conceals evidence almost as soon as it is made. Explorers in the early 20th century documented vast sand seas so featureless that entire caravans vanished despite meticulous preparation. British geographer Bertram Thomas, who became one of the first Europeans to cross the Empty Quarter in the 1930s, described areas where dunes blended into the horizon, creating illusions of endless flatness or false ridges. Reports from these crossings detail instances of caravans that never emerged on the other side, leaving questions about the scale of the desert's ability to erase all traces of human passage. Navigating these sands proves treacherous, with shifting landmarks and mirages that confuse perception, while even GPS devices occasionally mislead in this magnetic landscape. Salt flats and dry lake beds reflect sunlight in ways that distort distance, and the constantly moving dunes render maps quickly obsolete. Modern adventurers who attempt to traverse these remote zones often rely on satellite positioning, yet the desert's subtle magnetic anomalies and vast uniformity continue to challenge even the most sophisticated equipment. Remote corridors where salt flats meet rolling dunes are known for unexplained disappearances, as though the desert selectively conceals anyone who crosses them. These natural corridors, often the only feasible paths through certain sections of the Empty Quarter, have claimed travellers from all backgrounds, from Bedouin traders to modern scientists. Despite careful planning and the presence of support teams, these regions have repeatedly proven fatal, leaving nothing behind but sand swept smooth over weeks and months. Sudden sandstorms erupt without warning, reducing visibility to almost nothing, while hidden dangers like scorpions and snakes compound the ever-present risk. These storms can carry sand high into the air, scouring exposed skin, blinding eyes, and burying tracks in minutes. Even experienced desert navigators know that survival often depends on finding shelter quickly, yet in the most remote areas of the Rub al Khali, such refugees are rare, and exposure can be fatal before help can arrive. Bedouin elders share accounts of travellers who never returned, recounting them with pragmatic knowledge and respect for the desert rather than superstition. Oral histories describe routes where caravans were last seen, yet no remains were found despite subsequent searches. These stories reflect generations of understanding the desert's hazards, emphasizing caution, knowledge of water sources, and respect for the landscape, yet they also underscore that even the most experienced travellers can vanish completely in its vastness. Aerial surveillance and satellite imagery are limited in such a shifting environment, as sand can erase footprints and equipment within hours. Remote sensing technology, while helpful for mapping the broader desert, cannot reliably detect individual travellers or small campsites. Seasonal wind patterns continuously reshape dunes, bury old tracks, and expose new hazards, making the desert's surface a constantly moving puzzle that erases evidence of human passage almost immediately. Isolation dominates every horizon, and the psychological weight of navigating featureless dunes can lead to disorientation, exhaustion, and decisions that prove fatal. In such emptiness, distances can be misleading, time can feel distorted, and the mind may struggle to distinguish mirage from reality. Fatigue and panic, combined with the desert's extreme environmental stresses, leave individuals vulnerable to mistakes that ensure they will be absorbed entirely by the landscape. Persistent winds continue to reshape the desert's surface, uncovering new expanses of bare earth and ensuring that human traces are rarely permanent. Over months and years, entire dunes shift positions, erasing campsites, trails, and any sign of passage. Even carefully marked routes used by local tribes or scientific teams are subject to sudden change, creating an environment where the desert itself dictates who will be seen and who will vanish without a trace. In the Rub al-Khali, one miscalculated step can vanish forever into the endless sand, leaving no evidence that anyone was ever there. Lake Superior's northern shores. Cold waters lap against jagged cliffs and isolated beaches along Lake Superior's northern shores, a vast inland wilderness where people have disappeared without a trace. Stretching over 350 miles from Minnesota to Ontario, the northern coastline is marked by rocky bluffs, hidden coves, and stretches of boreal forest that limit visibility from both land and water. Despite modern navigation aids and safety protocols, fishermen, boaters, and hikers have occasionally vanished, leaving only scattered gear or abandoned vessels behind. The lake's immense scale and cold, dark waters make recovery difficult, reinforcing its reputation as an unforgiving and mysterious landscape. The shoreline alternates between dense forests of spruce, pine and fir and bare, rocky outcroppings that rise sharply from the water. Small harbours and secluded inlets provide temporary shelter, but many areas remain remote and difficult to access, even with modern vehicles. Hiking trails along the Canadian and Minnesota coasts are sparsely maintained, and travellers can quickly lose their bearings among the tangle of trees and sudden cliffs. In some cases, hikers attempting to reach a distant overlook or cross a river inlet have disappeared, leaving search teams with only footprints that vanish into sand or snow. With depths exceeding 1,300 feet in certain regions and water temperatures rarely exceeding 50 degrees Fahrenheit, Lake Superior presents an environment where even short immersion can be fatal. Cold shock, hypothermia, and rapid currents make survival challenging, particularly in winter or early spring. Strong undertows and hidden sandbars increase the danger for anyone venturing off-trail or navigating small watercraft. Even experienced swimmers and kayakers face sudden peril, as the lake's sheer volume and chilling conditions can overwhelm human endurance, erasing both person and evidence with astonishing speed. Historical records recount fishing vessels, canoes, and even steamships that vanished mysteriously along these shores. One particularly well-documented case involved a small fishing party whose boat was found drifting empty with nets still in place, yet no crew members were ever recovered. Shipwreck registries note dozens of disappearances in the 19th and 20th centuries, many during unexpected storms or in poorly charted coves. In these instances, gear and vessels occasionally wash ashore, but human remains are seldom discovered, underscoring the lake's capacity to swallow travellers without leaving a clear trace. Sudden squalls and fierce winds sweep across the lake, producing rogue waves, rapidly rising water levels, and dense fog banks that can disorient anyone on land or water. Even on seemingly calm days, the lake's weather can shift without warning, with winds reaching 60 miles per hour and waves towering over 10 feet. Boaters navigating these conditions often struggle to maintain orientation, while hikers along cliffed shorelines may be caught in sudden gales that push them toward water or unstable terrain. The unpredictability of storms contributes to disappearances that remain unsolved and baffling to rescuers. Certain stretches of the northern coastline, from Ontario's rugged cliffs to remote Minnesota inlets, appear to host recurring disappearances. patterns emerge where particular coves or bays have claimed multiple victims over decades, though there is no single explanation for their concentration. These areas are often near strong currents or unstable rock formations, yet some incidents occur far from recognised hazards, suggesting that the lake's power extends unpredictably across its northern reaches. Even patrolled or commonly travelled routes cannot fully protect against the lake's indifferent forces. Human misjudgment compounds the danger, from overconfident sailors underestimating storms to hikers venturing onto icebound edges during the brief northern winter. Thin ice or slippery rock can give way suddenly, and small boats may be overturned in seconds by unexpected swells. Alcohol, fatigue, or inexperience often exacerbate the risks, leaving individuals vulnerable to the lake's extremes. In many disappearances, precautionary measures were taken, yet the combination of environmental hazards and human error proved sufficient to erase all signs of those lost. Search and rescue operations face severe limitations. Helicopters struggle against wind gusts, while sonar and divers often fail to locate bodies or wreckage in the lake's murky depths. The lake's vastness, combined with low visibility and underwater topography that includes drop-offs, reefs, and silted areas, complicates even the most thorough searches. Cases of missing hikers or boaters can last days or weeks before search efforts are called off, and in many instances no trace is ever recovered. These failures reinforce the notion that Lake Superior's northern shores can conceal people almost entirely. Local lore and maritime cautionary tales describe Lake Superior as an unpredictable force, inspiring both awe and fear among fishermen, hikers, and residents. Tales of sudden vanishings and ghostly sounds carried across fog-laden coves are shared with pragmatic concern rather than superstition. Coastal communities maintain a wary respect for the lake, recognizing that even a short trip or a simple hike along the shore can lead to disappearance under the wrong conditions. The lake's reputation as both majestic and dangerous has been reinforced by generations of lived experience. The lake's shifting currents, seasonal storms, and immense volume ensure that any evidence of human passage is often dispersed or erased before recovery can occur. Floating debris may be carried hundreds of miles. Footprints along the shoreline can be wiped away in minutes by rising water or wind, and ice conditions can bury traces beneath sheets of frozen water that melt months later. In this environment, even the most meticulous searches and careful documentation cannot guarantee that someone missing will ever be found. Even marked trails along the shore can vanish beneath snow, ice, or high water levels, emphasizing the lake's constant, indifferent reshaping of the landscape. The northern shoreline, remote and sparsely populated, offers few permanent structures or rescue points, leaving those who disappear without assistance for long periods. The combination of isolation, extreme conditions, and the lake's sheer power has made Lake Superior's northern reaches a place where people sometimes vanish completely, leaving behind only questions and an enduring sense of unease. Along Lake Superior's northern shores, a person can disappear completely, swallowed by cold water and wind, leaving nothing but lingering questions. The Central Kalahari Game Reserve. Despite careful preparation, travellers entering the Central Kalahari Game Reserve sometimes vanish entirely, leaving behind no trace of their passage or final fate. The reserve, one of the largest protected wilderness areas in the world, spans nearly 52,800 square kilometres of Botswana's semi-arid interior. Its remoteness, combined with extreme environmental conditions, means that even experienced guides and researchers can disappear without warning. Reports of missing individuals range from tourists attempting self-guided safaris to local herders crossing unfamiliar territory, and in almost every instance, no evidence of their fate is ever recovered. Navigating this semi-arid wilderness requires constant vigilance, yet dry riverbeds and open plains can disorient even seasoned guides, making it easy to lose one's bearings. The ground alternates between compacted earth, shifting sands, and occasional salt flats, giving the illusion of uniformity that conceals natural hazards. A single misjudged step along an unmarked path can lead travellers far off their intended route, leaving search teams scrambling through endless kilometres of featureless terrain. Even experienced trackers note that distance perception can fail under the blazing sun or the shimmering heat of midday. The heat is relentless, often exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, and sudden thunderstorms can turn seemingly predictable terrain into treacherous mud and temporary waterways. Water sources are scarce and widely dispersed, forcing those who travel the reserve to carry supplies for extended journeys. Heat stroke and dehydration are constant threats, particularly to anyone attempting to cross long stretches of open land during midday hours. Even brief exposure to such extremes can incapacitate individuals, leaving them vulnerable to further hazards and making recovery unlikely. Wildlife roams freely across the reserve, from lions stalking the sparse grasslands to stealthy hyenas scavenging at dusk. Elephants occasionally traverse the plains, altering the terrain in ways that obscure human tracks or destroy makeshift shelters. While most animals avoid humans, their presence adds an unpredictable element to any expedition. Travelers unfamiliar with the behavior of local wildlife may underestimate its influence on both movement and safety, further compounding the risk of disappearance. Ephemeral watering holes, which are often the only reliable sources of water for both humans and animals, create deceptively dangerous points of contact in the reserve. These small ponds and pans can attract large predators as well as scavengers, making them risky for anyone approaching in search of drinking water. Tracks left by travellers are easily obliterated by the constant movement of wildlife, and soft sand or depressions may conceal small pits, termite mounds, or hidden burrows that can trip or trap the unwary. Even vehicles can become stuck in unexpected soft spots, forcing people to leave them behind in the heat of the day. Survival depends on careful timing, knowledge of animal behaviour and luck, and those who misjudge any element may vanish without leaving a trace. Compiled records and field reports document researchers, tourists and local guides who have disappeared without a trace, sometimes leaving vehicles or equipment behind but never revealing their final location. Early ethnographers and biologists navigating the reserve occasionally vanished, prompting searches that yielded nothing. Even in recent decades, tourists attempting self-guided expeditions or long treks have failed to return, sometimes leaving intact supplies or parked vehicles behind. Each disappearance reinforces the reserve's reputation as a place where human presence can vanish entirely. Unmarked tracks, shifting sands, and the uniformity of the terrain can stretch search efforts into days or weeks, often yielding no clues about a missing individual. Trails that are obvious one day may vanish the next under wind-blown sand or bush growth, and isolated depressions in the soil can obscure footprints almost immediately. Guides have reported losing sight of individuals within a few hundred meters, and even coordinated searches with multiple vehicles and foot teams often end without any findings. The reserve's natural processes erase evidence with astonishing efficiency. Exhaustion, dehydration, and equipment failure compound the danger, turning routine expeditions into life-threatening situations in the reserve's extreme isolation. Vehicles can overheat or become stuck in sand, radios may lose signal, and personal supplies can be depleted faster than expected. Many incidents begin as minor inconveniences and escalate quickly, leaving travellers exposed to both the environment and the psychological strain of extreme solitude. Those who attempt to continue without assistance often vanish entirely, leaving rescuers with only the memory of their intended route. Search and rescue teams face immense challenges. The reserve's vastness, sparse access points, and harsh climate limit the effectiveness of both ground and aerial operations. Even helicopters are hampered by heat waves and dust, while vehicles must contend with long distances between fuel and supply points. Diversions caused by terrain, features such as pans, dry riverbeds, and occasional thorn scrub can mislead rescuers, and the size of the area means that even with modern GPS mapping, locating a single missing individual is extraordinarily difficult. Guidance from local sand bushmen highlights certain areas as particularly risky, yet even the most experienced trackers cannot guarantee that anyone will be found once lost. Indigenous knowledge emphasizes water points, natural landmarks, and dangerous zones, and it has been passed down for generations. Nevertheless, the reserve's size, shifting sands, and vegetation growth ensure that even guided expeditions can encounter disorientation or accidents. These insights, while invaluable, cannot eliminate the inherent risks of human presence in such a vast and indifferent environment. Periodic rains and persistent winds constantly reshape the landscape, covering footprints, concealing equipment, and blending signs of passage into the uniform terrain of grass and salt. After a storm, any tracks made by travellers may vanish entirely, leaving no trace of recent activity. Likewise, vegetation regrowth or sand accumulation can erase marks within days, ensuring that even well-documented disappearances leave minimal physical evidence. The Kalahari's natural rhythms act as a silent guardian of its mystery, preserving the desert's secrecy and amplifying the uncertainty surrounding any vanishing. Isolation stretches endlessly across the reserve, where silence and open plains can distort perception, leaving travellers vulnerable to both the environment and their own misjudgments. The vast openness magnifies every sound and shadow, creating disorientation for anyone navigating alone. In this emptiness, time can feel suspended. Decisions become increasingly critical, and the line between safety and danger narrows rapidly. For those who vanish here, there is no closure, no trail, and no certainty, only the relentless expanse of wilderness. In the vast silence of the Kalahari, those who vanish leave behind only questions and the unbroken horizon. The Carpathian Mountains' deep forest zones. In the shadowed depths of the Carpathian forests, travellers have vanished without a trace, leaving only whispered accounts and unanswered questions behind. The range stretches across Central and Eastern Europe, spanning Romania, Slovakia, Poland and Ukraine, and is home to some of the densest, least accessible forests on the continent. Remote valleys, thick canopy, and rugged terrain create an environment where a single misstep can result in a permanent disappearance. Historical records, from missing shepherds to hikers who never returned, underscore the persistent mystery of these forests, where search efforts often fail to produce any evidence of those lost. Beech and spruce rise densely around narrow trails, while moss, ferns, and tangled undergrowth conceal even the faintest path through the woods. Many of these trees are centuries old, their trunks thick and twisted, forming natural walls that obscure sightlines and create labyrinthine passageways. The forest floor is uneven, dotted with fallen branches, rocks, and hidden roots, all of which can trip a traveller or conceal tracks. Even seasoned hikers find the combination of dense vegetation and irregular terrain disorienting, particularly when the trail markings are faint or obscured by natural growth. Thick fog drifts from the mountain slopes, reducing visibility to a few meters and transforming familiar clearings into a disorienting maze. Morning mists cling to the valleys, lingering until the sun rises high enough to evaporate them, and sudden weather changes can bring afternoon fog that blinds travelers. Under these conditions, sounds are distorted, distances misjudged, and familiar landmarks rendered unrecognizable. Hikers who rely on visual cues alone often find themselves walking in circles, unaware that they have strayed far from intended routes. Ravines cut sharply through the forest, and hidden sinkholes or rushing streams can swallow evidence of human passage entirely. Steep inclines and rocky outcrops conceal natural hazards that are invisible from a distance, while narrow gullies can trap or injure anyone who missteps. Seasonal runoff can transform dry gullies into dangerous torrents, and shifting soils or fallen rock can block even well-trodden paths. In some areas, human footprints or belongings are obliterated within hours by natural processes, leaving no indication that anyone was ever there. Over decades, hikers, shepherds, and occasional researchers have disappeared, sometimes leaving personal effects behind but never revealing their final location. Local authorities and park services maintain records of missing persons, noting cases where backpacks, tents, or shoes were recovered, but no body or further clue was found. Folklore sometimes arises to explain these vanishings, but documented search efforts reveal the harsh reality. The forest's complexity and isolation make recovery extremely difficult, and some people are simply lost to the landscape. Errors in judgment, such as underestimating steep inclines or relying on outdated maps, frequently leave travellers isolated and vulnerable. Even minor mistakes can be magnified under the forest canopy, where every wrong turn can result in a misalignment with navigational landmarks. Travellers unfamiliar with the terrain may fail to account for sudden changes in elevation or the hidden presence of ravines and undergrowth. In dense portions of the forest, compass readings can be affected by iron-rich soils, and GPS signals may fluctuate, creating a false sense of security that leads explorers further astray. Dense foliage and sudden weather shifts limit search and rescue efforts, making even coordinated ground teams or aerial reconnaissance ineffective. Helicopters often cannot penetrate thick canopies, while ground teams struggle through brambles, fallen trees, and steep slopes. Heavy rain or wet snow can render trails impassable and obscure tracks, while sudden temperature drops endanger rescuers and limit the time they can safely remain in the field. As a result, searches frequently yield no results, leaving families and authorities with more questions than answers. Stories passed down through local villages tell of hidden spirits, ancient guardians, and cursed paths, blending folklore with the tangible dangers of the forest. Legends speak of phantom figures, unmarked trails that reappear in strange places, and voices carried on the wind that seem to lure travellers off course. While these tales cannot be verified, they reflect generations of local knowledge warning of the forest's capacity to disorient and overwhelm those who enter unprepared. Even today, guides often caution against venturing too far from marked paths or travelling alone in the remote valleys. Isolation, the monotony of the canopy, and distorted sounds can amplify fear, causing travellers to panic and misjudge distance, direction, or timing. The interplay of shadow, wind, and forest acoustics can make branches sound like footsteps, and rushing streams seem closer or further than they actually are. Panic can lead to hasty decisions, such as abandoning paths, removing safety equipment, or attempting dangerous shortcuts. Once disoriented, individuals are often unable to retrace their steps, and exhaustion quickly compounds the peril, leaving them vulnerable to environmental hazards. Fallen trees, shifting soil, and rapid undergrowth continuously reshape the forest floor, erasing footprints, scattered belongings, and all signs of human presence. Heavy rains can sweep away tracks, while rotting leaves and decomposing vegetation cover evidence of recent activity. Landslides, tree falls, and soil movement are common in the steep valleys, often blocking trails entirely. In many cases, even detailed notes about routes taken become useless once the forest alters the terrain, ensuring that human traces are temporary and fragile in the face of nature's constant renewal. Even experienced guides acknowledge that the forest's vastness and complexity leave many disappearances unresolved, preserving the mystery of those who vanish. Despite modern tools like GPS, satellite mapping, and coordinated search parties, the forest's natural concealments, unpredictable weather, and disorienting topography ensure that some travellers remain permanently lost. The Carpathian's deep forests maintain an unspoken authority over those who enter, asserting their secrecy with a silence that both captivates and terrifies. Within the Carpathian forests, those who disappear are absorbed by the wilderness so completely that it is as if they were never there at all. The Gobi Desert Borderlands. Violent swings between scorching days and frigid nights strain both supplies and human endurance, testing the limits of preparation in the Gobi's harsh environment. Temperatures can rise above 104 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and plummet well below freezing at night, a swing that challenges even the most carefully planned expeditions. Explorers must contend with clothing, water, and shelter that can withstand both extremes simultaneously, yet even minor miscalculations in timing or equipment can rapidly escalate into life-threatening situations. These conditions alone have contributed to disappearances, as those traversing the borderlands may be incapacitated by exposure long before any help can arrive. Shifting sands and gravel scatter across the plains, erasing footprints, tracks, and any evidence of movement almost instantly. A minor path created over hours can vanish within minutes under gusts of wind, leaving rescuers or companions disoriented and unable to follow the vanished person's trail. In regions where sparse rock formations punctuate the terrain, sandslides can obliterate any subtle depressions that might indicate passage, transforming an area previously marked by human presence into a uniform surface that offers no guidance or clues. Intense solar glare reflects unpredictably from salt flats and pale rock, making it difficult to judge distances or spot subtle hazards. The reflective surfaces create optical interference, especially during midday, when even seasoned travellers report overestimating how far an oasis or ridge lies. Compounded by heat haze, the sun's brightness can distort perception so severely that objects appear to shift, leading some to wander toward hazards or lose track of familiar routes entirely. Microbursts of wind sweep suddenly across exposed terrain, hurling grit and sand with enough force to sting skin and obscure vision. These abrupt gusts can last only moments yet carry enough sand to cover tracks or clog equipment. Travellers exposed to such bursts may experience sudden disorientation or minor injuries, forcing them to stop or seek shelter in inhospitable conditions, a brief pause that can quickly become critical in an environment where every moment affects survival. Intermittent wells and oases dry for months at a time, leaving anyone who miscalculates their water reserves dangerously exposed. Water scarcity is perhaps the most pressing threat in this desert. Even experienced nomads must plan journeys carefully to coincide with seasonal availability. Historical accounts document explorers and caravans failing to locate reliable sources, sometimes abandoning vehicles or pack animals in desperation, leaving behind traces that vanish under sand and wind without revealing the ultimate fate of the people involved. Jagged outcrops of sandstone and clay, interspersed with hidden gullies and ephemeral dry riverbeds, create sudden obstacles that can trap vehicles or mislead the unwary. These formations, sculpted over millennia by wind and occasional flash floods, often appear solid and navigable from a distance, but can conceal deep fissures or unstable ground. Explorers have reported that even experienced caravan leaders misjudge the firmness of these surfaces, causing equipment to become stuck or forcing abrupt detours into unfamiliar terrain. The unpredictable topography, combined with the desert's shifting sands, means that a seemingly minor misstep can set a traveller on a course from which no traces are ever recovered. Optical illusions appear frequently across salt flats and rocky expanses, with mirages of distant ridges or lakes deceiving even seasoned navigators. These visual distortions can lead travellers off course for miles, and repeated exposure to mirages may produce disorientation or erode confidence in decision-making. In a landscape with so few reliable landmarks, these illusions are more than minor annoyances. They can determine life or death. Rescue teams, relying on last known bearings, often find themselves chasing images that evaporate into the heat, leaving them with no tangible evidence of the vanished. Electronic devices are vulnerable to failure, as sand, heat, and electrical interference can compromise GPS units, radios, and batteries without warning. Nomadic guides report that solar glare can interfere with compass readings, while dust infiltration damages connectors and circuits, making modern navigation tools unreliable. For travellers relying on technology to maintain contact or find direction, a malfunctioning device can transform a simple trek into an extended exposure to the desert's hazards, a factor that has coincided with multiple unresolved disappearances. Sparse desert flora and fauna conceal hazards from venomous snakes and scorpions to burrowing mammals that destabilize the ground beneath careful footsteps. Even plants adapted to survive the Gobi's extremes can obstruct footing or create false impressions of solid ground. Travellers unfamiliar with these ecological subtleties risk minor accidents that compound over time, particularly in areas where help is distant and environmental hazards accumulate. These subtle threats, though easily overlooked in a vast empty terrain, contribute directly to the unpredictability of human presence in the borderlands. Long stretches without settlements or landmarks amplify isolation, leaving even minor miscalculations increasingly perilous over vast distances. Unlike more populated regions, the Gobi offers few points of reference to correct mistakes or reassess orientation. Those who misjudge distances or fail to notice subtle environmental cues may find themselves removed from any known route within hours. The sheer scale of the desert ensures that once someone deviates from the path, retracing steps or signalling for assistance becomes an almost insurmountable challenge. Records of caravans, researchers, and patrols note incidents where individuals vanished entirely, sometimes leaving equipment or pack animals intact but no further clues. Explorers attempting scientific or commercial surveys have disappeared despite careful planning and preparation, and even the most experienced guides have found themselves unable to explain how these individuals could vanish in terrain so thoroughly mapped in modern times. The combination of environmental extremes, sparse water, disorienting optical phenomena, and unpredictable hazards creates conditions in which disappearance is not only possible but remarkably easy, leaving investigators and historians puzzled. Even the most experienced nomads recognize that the desert's scale and unpredictability can obscure entire groups for days or indefinitely. They speak cautiously of certain zones where sand shifts more violently, or where sudden wind patterns can erase tracks in minutes. Oral traditions emphasize caution and respect for these areas, acknowledging that the desert does not forgive misjudgment. Despite centuries of habitation along trade routes and in scattered settlements, the Gobi retains a persistent aura of mystery, where human activity can vanish with astonishing finality. Time and elements conspire in the Gobi to render each disappearance a riddle the desert refuses to answer. The Canary Islands' remote ravines. A sudden chill rises from deep within the ravine, carrying the scent of damp volcanic stone and the faint, unsettling whisper of the wind through narrow crevices. Even in daylight, shadows twist unpredictably along jagged walls, creating the illusion of movement where none exists. Visitors often note the unnerving quiet, broken only by the faint trickle of hidden streams or the rustle of small animals navigating the rocky terrain. It is here, among these twisting passages carved from hardened lava, that people have disappeared without a trace, leaving searchers puzzled and communities wary. The combination of extreme isolation, sudden terrain changes, and visual deception makes these ravines particularly perilous for anyone venturing inside without detailed knowledge or guidance. Layers of solidified lava ash and centuries of erosion have shaped the island's barrancos into intricate passageways that appear navigable from above yet conceal dangerous drops, unstable ledges, and hidden pits. Over time, water and wind have carved these ravines into labyrinthine corridors, some stretching hundreds of meters deep with walls so steep they catch sunlight only at rare angles. Even minor rockfalls or loose stones can trigger sudden slides, and sediment deposits can shift underfoot, transforming familiar routes into unpredictable hazards. For those unfamiliar with the island's volcanic history, a casual descent can become perilous almost immediately, demanding constant attention to every step and every surface. Stories of vanished hikers, local shepherds, and occasional tourists show a troubling pattern. Backpacks, clothing, or even vehicles may be left behind, yet the people themselves are never recovered. The surrounding cliffs make aerial observation difficult, and by the time rescuers reach the point of last contact, natural processes may have altered the terrain, erasing footprints or shifting loose rocks. In some cases, hikers following known trails report suddenly being unable to find the paths they used only minutes before, suggesting how quickly the environment can confound perception. Even in areas visited by locals for generations, the ravines hold corners where human presence seems impermanent. Hidden crevices and abrupt precipices create deceptive terrain, where a seemingly gentle slope may end in a drop invisible from above. Travellers have reported misjudging distance and stability, only to find themselves at the edge of a narrow chasm. In many instances, a single slip or misstep can separate a person from known routes permanently, leaving rescuers with little evidence of their path or fate. Some of these ravines are so narrow that wind funnels sound unpredictably, creating auditory illusions that can draw a person toward danger without their awareness. Light behaves strangely in these volcanic gorges. Sunlight filters unevenly through jagged walls, casting shadows that shift with the time of day and the movement of the observer. Depth perception becomes unreliable, and familiar landmarks appear distorted, as if the ravine itself is subtly rearranging the scene. Reflections off wet rock, volcanic glass, and moisture can produce momentary glimmers that suggest safety or conceal hazards. Several hikers have noted that a route they remembered clearly during the ascent no longer aligns on the return, a phenomenon that has contributed to multiple unexplained disappearances. Search and rescue operations here are uniquely challenging. Helicopters cannot always hover safely in the narrow gorges, and ground teams often rely on ropes, harnesses, and careful rappel techniques to reach lower levels. Loose stones and unstable ledges pose continual threats to both victims and rescuers, while sudden weather changes, such as rain turning volcanic gravel into slick surfaces, can slow progress dramatically. Even experienced teams must move cautiously to avoid creating additional casualties. Despite meticulous planning, many searchers conclude without finding any trace of the missing, leaving families and authorities frustrated and puzzled. Flora within the ravines adds another layer of hazard. Thick moss carpets some slopes, making surfaces unexpectedly slippery, while invasive plants and thorny shrubs conceal small cliffs or unstable rocks. Wild ferns and low-lying shrubs can obscure the edges of fissures that drop dozens of meters. A hiker's foot can easily slip through moss-covered gaps or snag on concealed roots, and minor injuries can rapidly escalate into dangerous situations in these isolated areas. Combined with the challenges of steep walls and narrow passages, even careful movement becomes a test of concentration and endurance. Wildlife, though generally non-threatening, can startle the unwary and contribute to missteps. Lizards dart unpredictably across rocks, while nesting birds may take flight unexpectedly, creating momentary distractions. Small mammals burrow under loose gravel, leaving hidden hollows that can destabilize footing. Even insects like wasps or swarming ants can provoke reactions that, on narrow ledges, become potentially dangerous. In a terrain where every step carries weight, these subtle interactions between animal life and the environment amplify the unpredictability of movement and increase the likelihood of separation or injury. Human error remains a significant factor. Even experienced climbers or hikers may underestimate the difficulty of the ravines, assuming landmarks are reliable or that familiar slopes are stable. The cumulative effect of narrow corridors, unexpected drops, deceptive shadows, and unstable ground can lead to misjudgments that escalate quickly. Documented cases show that those who believed they could retrace their steps often found themselves disoriented, with entire sections of the ravine appearing unfamiliar. In some instances, panic and fatigue combine, leading individuals to move erratically and vanish without a trace. Local folklore and historical warnings reinforce the ravine's reputation as dangerous and mysterious. Generations of islanders speak of areas where travellers have disappeared inexplicably, cautioning newcomers to avoid certain passages or to proceed only with guides. Some traditions suggest that certain ravines are illuminated differently, a poetic way of describing how light, shadow, and perception can mislead the eye. While these accounts are anecdotal, they underscore a persistent recognition of the ravine's hazards and their capacity to confound even the most careful exploration. The combination of geological intricacy, deceptive lighting, isolation, and psychological strain ensures that these gorges remain a place of enduring enigma. Every crevice, shadowed wall, and hidden drop contributes to an environment where people can vanish with little or no trace, defying both natural and human understanding. The physical and perceptual traps of these volcanic ravines create situations where time, orientation, and memory seem unreliable, leaving those who enter vulnerable in ways few other landscapes can replicate. Those who enter the narrow gorges may step into a place where maps and memory hold no sway. The Yukon's Dempster Highway corridor. Few travellers realise that along the Dempster Highway, a road clearly etched on maps, people have vanished without leaving a single trace behind. Stretching over 700 miles from Dawson City to Inuvik, it is one of North America's most remote and challenging thoroughfares, cutting through tundra, frozen rivers, and permafrost terrain. Despite its defined path, the corridor isolates anyone who ventures too far from immediate assistance, and historical and modern reports reveal a chilling pattern. Vehicles remain parked, supplies left untouched, and travellers themselves disappear entirely, as if the landscape quietly swallowed them. Icy winds sweep across tundra flats, turning even short stretches of road into life-threatening corridors where vehicles can skid into hidden ditches or drift toward frozen rivers. During the winter months, temperatures can plunge below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, creating frostbite risks in minutes and rendering any stranded vehicle a fragile lifeline. Snowdrifts obscure the edges of the highway, and the sun's low angle in winter produces long shadows that distort the terrain, making navigation deceptively complex. Even in summer, melting permafrost and sudden thawing streams can turn seemingly straightforward passages into treacherous obstacles. Drivers who underestimate the relentless cold or overestimate their supplies may find themselves stranded for hours, then days, in a landscape that feels both infinite and indifferent. Remote lodges and towns are spaced hundreds of miles apart, leaving travellers dependent on careful planning and self-sufficiency. Fatigue sets in quickly, and isolation intensifies every minor error in judgment. Long-haul drivers and adventure tourists alike have reported disorientation on stretches that appear repetitive, with the flat tundra and snow-swept hills erasing landmarks that seem obvious on a map. Investigators have documented vehicles left with doors ajar and personal items untouched, yet the travellers themselves have simply disappeared from the corridor. Sometimes cars are found idling, fuel tanks full or camping gear neatly arranged beside tents, yet no one is inside and no tracks lead away from the scene. In other cases, travellers vanish after routine stops for rest or meals, leaving search teams with only footprints that vanish within hours due to wind or fresh snow. These incidents are not isolated, but a repeating pattern that puzzles both local authorities and experienced search and rescue personnel. Beneath the frozen surface, uneven ground, snow-covered river crossings, and ice-slick mud make every mile unpredictable, even when the road appears straight and level. River ice can crack under the weight of a vehicle, while hidden soft spots in thawing mud threaten to trap wheels and leave drivers stranded. The terrain's deceptive simplicity encourages overconfidence, and even minor miscalculations can rapidly escalate into emergencies. In summer months, thawing soil exposes sinkholes and eroded patches, while winter's frozen landscape can hide abrupt drops or snow bridges over creeks. Elusive wolves and roaming caribou occasionally intersect travellers' paths, and encounters with these animals, though rare, can distract or endanger those already fatigued by the journey. Bears, though less common along the road itself, inhabit nearby forests, and can appear unpredictably when travellers camp too close to wooded areas. Even caribou herds crossing the highway at speed can force sudden evasive manoeuvres, and these interactions have occasionally coincided with disappearances when drivers became disoriented or stranded. Sudden whiteouts and fog can reduce visibility to mere meters, rendering both GPS devices and familiar landmarks unreliable as the highway becomes a tunnel of indistinct shapes. Blowing snow can erase tracks within minutes, while wind gusts create illusions of motion in the surrounding tundra. Travellers report a sensation of disconnection from the landscape, where every bend and hill seems identical, and familiar features vanish under shifting weather conditions. Electronics may fail in extreme cold, leaving maps, radios, and GPS units as only partial guides in a corridor that refuses to be tamed. Even with helicopters and ground teams, the vast distances, frozen rivers, and unbroken stretches of tundra limit rescue options, often leaving searches inconclusive despite modern technology. Fuel caches are rare, and access roads to potential emergency sites are minimal. Coordinated searches must contend with deep snow, thin river ice, and weather that can turn sudden and violent. In many cases, multiple search attempts over days or weeks reveal no trace of the missing, reinforcing the corridor's reputation as a place where human presence can evaporate almost entirely. From documented traveller disappearances to missing long-haul drivers, historical records show that incidents on the Dempster follow a disturbing pattern of sudden vanishings with minimal evidence. Local newspapers and RCMP records recount stories of hikers or truckers who stopped for a short break, only to vanish hours later. Modern adventurers attempting to document their journey with satellite trackers or GPS logging have sometimes produced abrupt signal losses, leaving families and authorities with incomplete records and mounting questions about the highway's hidden hazards. The endless stretches of white and grey can warp perception, making distance and direction uncertain and turning even experienced travellers' confidence into a fragile illusion. Long hours alone on a frozen road can heighten disorientation, slow reaction times, and make even basic decisions perilous. The corridor's repetition creates a subtle psychological trap. A driver may feel familiar with the route, yet subtle changes in weather, ice, or snow can transform it into a landscape that is both deceptive and dangerous. Every element of the Dempster corridor, extreme cold, isolation, unpredictable terrain, and mental strain, combines to create circumstances in which disappearances, though baffling, occur with haunting regularity. Vehicles remain, supplies are untouched, and travellers fade into the expanse as if the highway itself claims them, a corridor that is mapped yet never entirely known. The Dempster Highway stretches onward, a frozen artery where human presence can vanish into the tundra as if it were never there at all.